Dawn broke over Pine Creek Valley, bathing the weathered cabin in golden light. James Walker stood at his porch coffee mug in hand, watching as the forest stirred to life. At 45, his face bore the lines of a man who had seen both remarkable heights and devastating lows, crow's feet, at the corners of his eyes from years of precision, engineering calluses from rebuilding a life with his bare hands after losing everything. 5 years since the accident that took his wife James had traded his corner office at Westbrook Aviation for a rustic cabin in Montana, where the mortgage was paid, but the future uncertain. The local garage where he fixed engines would close in 2 weeks, and his in-laws' custody lawsuit loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. "Morning, Daddy." Emma appeared in the doorway, her dark hair still tousled from sleep, wearing her mother's old flannel shirt as a makeshift dress. At 6, she carried herself with the careful dignity of a child who had grown up too fast. The specialized school she needed for her dyslexia wasn't optional, and James had exactly 1 month to figure out how to keep their world from falling apart. As they headed into the forest that afternoon to gather blueberries, neither could have imagined how a single moment, a woman bitten by a snake, a choice to help would completely transform their lives. When the helicopter descended hours later and security agents arrived, James realized this wasn't just any hiker he had rescued. This was Sophia Mitchell, heir to a technology empire, a woman with secrets that would rewrite both their destinies. This is a story about unexpected encounters, second chances, and how sometimes life's greatest treasures are found when we least expect them. If this kind of journey speaks to your heart, subscribe to our channel for more tales that remind us what truly matters. Now settle in and let's begin. The forest trail stretched ahead, dappled with late afternoon light filtering through the canopy. James Walker moved with the quiet confidence of a man who knew these woods as well as he once knew the intricate designs of aircraft wings. At 45, his face carried the weathered lines of someone who had seen both remarkable heights and devastating lows. "Don't go too far ahead, sweetheart," James called, gently stepping over a fallen log, his voice carrying the same steady patience he used when explaining how engines worked. "I won't, Daddy," Emma replied, her voice bright and confident in the quiet woods, her braided hair bouncing as she skipped a few steps ahead. It was their Sunday tradition, this walk through the forest behind their modest cabin. They didn't need much, James always said. Just air that smelled like paint, a working truck, and each other. James wasn't always a man of simple things. 5 years ago, he'd worn crisp button-down shirts, attended meetings about aerodynamics and fuel efficiency, and designed systems for commercial airliners that would carry thousands of passengers safely across continents. He had been one of the lead engineers at Westbrook Aviation, with a corner office overlooking Seattle's skyline. That life ended the day Rebecca, his wife, did. Gone in an instant when a distracted driver ran a red light on a rainy Seattle evening. James had been on a conference call when he received the news. The sound of his coffee mug shattering on the office floor still echoed in his nightmares. After the funeral, he couldn't bear to design safety systems anymore. The irony was too cruel. So he packed what mattered: photo albums, Emma's toys, Rebecca's favorite books, and drove east until the mountains felt like they might shield them from further loss. The cabin had belonged to his father, a high school science teacher who'd spent summers teaching Emma about constellations and the life cycle of monarch butterflies. The old man had passed 2 years before Rebecca, leaving James with a property that had seemed like a burden then, but became their salvation later. In Pine Creek Valley, James found a different kind of peace. Not happiness, not at first, but a place where glee echoed softly instead of screaming. A place where Emma could run free and where the only deadlines were set by the seasons. But even here, challenges found them. Emma, brilliant and curious, struggled with dyslexia that the small local school wasn't equipped to address. Letters danced on pages for her, stubborn and unyielding, while her mind raced ahead with ideas and questions. The principal had suggested tempering expectations, words that made James's jaw clench every time he remembered them. Then there were Rebecca's parents. Well-meaning but persistent, they believed Emma needed the advantages of city life, private schools, and specialists. Their calls grew more frequent, their suggestions about custody arrangements less subtle. Their lawyer had contacted James just last week. The trust fund would cover her education, they'd said, as if money was the issue. As if James hadn't given up a six-figure salary because he understood that what Emma needed most was stability and a father who was present. Financial concerns were real, though. The garage where James worked 3 days a week, fixing everything from lawn mowers to classic cars, was struggling. Old Joe was talking about retirement, and without a buyer, the place would likely close by winter. James had enough saved for a few months, but after that, uncertainty loomed like storm clouds over the mountains. In his more honest moments, James admitted to himself that he missed certain aspects of his old life. Not the stress or the endless meetings, but the feeling of creating something meaningful, of solving complex problems with elegant solutions. Sometimes late at night, he'd sketch aircraft designs on the back of grocery receipts, ideas that would never take flight except in his imagination. These thoughts occupied his mind as they walked deeper into the forest, the familiar trail opening to a clearing where wild blueberries grew in abundance. Emma's favorite spot, their quiet sanctuary. The cabin sat at the end of a winding gravel road, its weathered logs and stone chimney blending into the landscape as if it had grown from the Montana soil itself. Solar panels, James's addition, caught the afternoon light on one side of the sloped roof, while a vegetable garden stretched behind rows of tomatoes, carrots, and beans thriving under careful tending. Inside the main room combined kitchen, dining area, and living space in a way that felt cozy rather than cramped. Bookshelves lined one wall filled with volumes on engineering, astronomy, classic literature, and children's stories. Emma's drawings were pinned to the refrigerator door, colorful creations showing mountains, animals, and a stick figure family of two. In the detached garage under a tarp sat James's ongoing project, a 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback Acapulco Blue, its restoration moving forward in small increments, whenever time and money allowed. The car had been his father's pride, driven only on special occasions and then carefully stored. Now it served as both a connection to the past and a promise for the future, something he and Emma would finish together. "When can we take it for a real drive, Daddy?" Emma would ask, sitting in the passenger seat pretending to navigate while James tinkered with the engine. "When it's ready and when you're tall enough to see over the dashboard without a booster," he'd answer with a smile, knowing that finishing the car was as much about the journey as the destination. Most mornings began early with James making breakfast, while Emma fed the chickens that roamed the small coop he'd built last spring. On the days he worked at the garage, they'd drive into Riverstone together. Emma dropped off at the small elementary school before James continued to the edge of town, where Old Joe's garage had served the community for nearly 40 years. The work suited his hands, if not always his mind. There was an honesty to mechanical problems. They had solutions, clear paths from broken to fixed. Unlike life's more complicated troubles, a mechanical issue could be diagnosed, addressed, and resolved with the right tools and knowledge. Weekends belonged to Emma. They'd hike, fish at the lake, tend the garden, or simply read together on the porch swing as thunderstorms rolled across the valley. Sometimes they'd visit the farmer's market in town, where Emma had developed a friendship with Mrs. Williams, an elderly woman who sold homemade jam and always saved a jar of blackberry for her favorite customer. Their closest neighbor, Henry Thompson, lived half a mile down the road in a house filled with historical artifacts and antiques from his 40 years teaching history at Riverstone High. At 70, with a full white beard and glasses perpetually perched on the end of his nose, Henry had appointed himself as something between a grandfather figure and a mentor to both James and Emma. "That child's mind works differently, not incorrectly," Henry had said when James shared his frustrations with the school's approach to Emma's learning difficulties. "Einstein couldn't read until he was 9. The world tries to fit square pegs into round holes, and when they don't fit, they blame the peg instead of the hole." Henry would come for dinner once a week, bringing historical artifacts for Emma to examine: arrowheads, old coins, Victorian buttons, tangible pieces of history that didn't require reading but sparked her imagination. In return, James kept Henry's ancient pickup truck running and helped with repairs around his property. Despite the peace they'd found in Pine Creek Valley, James couldn't shake the feeling that they were living in a holding pattern. The garage was failing. Emma's needs weren't being met at school. Rebecca's parents were becoming more insistent. And sometimes in the quiet moments after Emma was asleep, the cabin felt too empty, the silence too complete. James never spoke of loneliness. Not to Henry, not to the few acquaintances he'd made in town, and certainly not to Emma. But it lived with them nonetheless, an unseen presence at their table in the empty chair that would never again hold Rebecca. That Sunday afternoon in late summer, as they gathered blueberries in the forest clearing, James had no way of knowing that loneliness was about to be interrupted in the most unexpected way. They were turning back toward the trail when he heard it, a sound not natural to the woods, a faint broken moan barely audible above the rustle of leaves in the breeze. James froze. His instincts kicked in faster than thought. "Emma," he said quietly, crouching beside her. "Stay here behind this tree. I'll be right back." She nodded without a word, sensing his change in tone, clutching her pail of berries close to her chest. The sound came again, more urgent this time. James moved quickly, his boots nearly silent over the pine needles and moss. He followed the sound to the edge of a small ravine where the trees thinned and ferns grew thick in the partial shade. At first it looked like someone had fallen asleep there, a young woman curled on her side as if she were napping in the leaves. But her skin was pale, almost gray. Her breath came in shallow pants. One leg was bent unnaturally and her ankle was swollen, the skin around it taut and angry with color. Near her hand, half hidden in the undergrowth, lay a hiking boot that had been hastily removed. James knelt beside her and gently touched her shoulder. "Hey, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, soft brown eyes, confused and terrified. They focused on him for a moment before clouding with pain. "Snake," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Okay, you're going to be all right," James said, immediately pulling off his flannel overshirt and wrapping it around her lower leg in a makeshift compression bandage. The puncture marks were clearly visible just above her ankle, two small holes with inflammation spreading outward. "I need to get you to a doctor. Can you tell me your name?" "Sophia," she managed, trying to sit up but falling back with a grimace. "I'm James. Don't try to move, Sophia. The venom will spread faster if you do." He glanced back toward the trail, calculating. The nearest hospital was 30 miles away in Riverstone, and cell service was notoriously unreliable in these woods. "I'm going to carry you. My cabin isn't far." She nodded weakly, her eyes beginning to lose focus again. James scooped her up as gently as possible, surprised by how light she felt in his arms. She smelled faintly of cedar and something else. Maybe jasmine. Her dark hair fell across his arm as her head rested against his shoulder. Emma was standing exactly where he'd left her, clutching the blueberry pail with white knuckles. Her eyes widened at the sight of the woman in her father's arms. "Is she okay?" she asked, voice small with worry. "She's hurt. A snake bit her." "We're going to help her," James explained, keeping his voice calm for Emma's sake. "Can you carry the backpack for me? You'll need to walk ahead and open the doors when we get home." Emma nodded solemnly, slipping the too large backpack over her shoulders. She kept glancing back as they hurried along the trail, her young face a mixture of concern and curiosity. The cabin came into view just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. A summer storm was rolling in from the mountains, dark clouds gathering above the pines. Emma ran ahead to open the door, and James carried Sophia inside, laying her gently on the worn leather couch. "Emma, bring me the first aid kit from the bathroom, then wet some clean towels with cool water." James instructed, his voice steady and focused. Years of emergency training during his engineering days had prepared him for crisis situations. His hands remained calm even when his mind raced. While Emma gathered supplies, James carefully elevated Sophia's leg on a cushion and checked her vital signs. Her pulse was rapid but strong. The swelling hadn't yet spread above her calf, a good sign. "Rattlesnake?" he asked when her eyes opened again. She nodded. "I think so. Didn't see it until..." She winced as a wave of pain hit her. Emma returned with the first aid kit and towels. James placed a cool compress on Sophia's forehead and another around her ankle. Then he reached for the landline phone on the kitchen wall, dialing the emergency number. Static crackled on the line. He tried again with the same result. "Storms knocked out the lines," he muttered. Pulling his cell phone from his pocket, no service bars. The mountains and weather had conspired to cut them off completely. "How far?" Sophia began, her voice faint. "Hospital's 30 miles. Roads will be dangerous in this weather, and my truck's been acting up." James made a quick decision. "I'm going to treat you here first. Get the swelling down, then reassess. Most rattlesnake bites aren't fatal if treated properly." Emma stood beside the couch, watching with worried eyes. "Is she going to be okay, Daddy?" James nodded, giving his daughter a reassuring smile. "She'll be fine. Snake bites are scary, but we know what to do." He turned to Sophia. "Are you allergic to any medications?" She shook her head slightly. Good. I'm going to give you some antihistamines and pain relievers. They'll help until we can get you proper medical attention. As James administered the medications and continued to monitor the swelling, Emma pulled her small wooden chair close to the couch. With the solemn responsibility of a much older child, she placed a fresh, cool towel on Sophia's forehead. My name's Emma, she said softly. Don't worry, my daddy fixes everything. A ghost of a smile crossed Sophia's pale lips. Thank you, Emma. Outside, thunder cracked across the sky and rain began to hammer against the roof and windows. The storm had arrived in full force, turning the late afternoon dark as twilight. James lit the kerosene lamps that they kept for power outages, casting the cabin in a warm, flickering glow. Sophia's condition stabilized over the next hour. The medication seemed to be helping, and the swelling, while still present, hadn't spread further up her leg. Her color improved slightly, and she was able to drink small sips of water that Emma carefully helped her with. Who do you think she is, Daddy? Emma whispered when Sophia drifted into a light sleep. I don't know, James replied, brushing a strand of hair from Sophia's forehead. But I know we were meant to find her. As evening settled in, the storm showed no signs of abating. Rain continued to pound against the windows, and wind howled through the pine trees surrounding the cabin. Emma fell asleep in the large armchair, curled up with her favorite quilt, while James kept vigil, checking Sophia's vital signs regularly and replacing the cool compresses on her ankle. It was just after 9 when they heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm, a low, deep thrum, rhythmic and mechanical. James stood and moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. His heart nearly stopped at what he saw. Out beyond the clearing where their property met the forest, a helicopter was descending, its powerful searchlight cutting through the rain and darkness. It was sleek, matte black, nothing like the medical evacuation helicopters he'd seen before. This looked more like something from a military operation or a private security force. The rotors sent the rain whipping sideways as it touched down. Emma stirred in the chair, awakened by the noise. Daddy, what's that? Stay here, James said, moving toward the door. But before he reached it, Sophia's voice stopped him. It's all right, she said, more strength in her voice than before. They're with me. James turned to look at her, confusion evident on his face. She was trying to sit up, grimacing with the effort, but determined. I should have told you. I'm not just a hiker who got lost. Before she could explain further, heavy footsteps sounded on the porch, followed by a sharp, authoritative knock. James opened the door to find 3 men in dark suits standing in the rain. The one in front wore an earpiece, his posture rigid and professional. Behind him, another held what looked like a medical case, while the third scanned the surroundings with practiced efficiency. We're here for Ms. Mitchell, the lead man said, his tone clipped and formal. Please step aside. Ms. Mitchell. The name hit James like a physical blow. Sophia Mitchell. He'd read that name in news articles, seen it on technology websites. The reclusive heir to the Mitchell tech empire, a company worth billions that had revolutionized renewable energy storage systems. And she had been lying on his couch, wrapped in his flannel shirt, her secrets bleeding into the wood floors of a life she didn't belong to. For reasons he couldn't explain, he wasn't ready to let her go. James stood firmly in the doorway, his body blocking their entrance. She's not going anywhere until I know she's stable, he said, voice calm but unyielding. The lead man's expression didn't change. Sir, we have medical personnel standing by in the helicopter. Ms. Mitchell will receive the best care possible. From inside the cabin, Sophia called out, James, it's okay. Let them in, please. He hesitated a moment longer before stepping aside. The men moved with practiced efficiency, the one with the medical case immediately kneeling beside Sophia and beginning to check her vitals. The other 2 maintained positions near the door, their eyes constantly scanning the room. Emma had woken fully now and stood beside James, clutching his hand as they watched the strangers take over their small home. Sophia looked toward them, her eyes finding Emma first. Thank you for the cool towels, she said softly. They helped a lot. Emma nodded solemnly but said nothing, pressing closer to her father's side. The man with the medical case spoke into a communicator on his wrist. Vitals stable, localized swelling, preparing for transport. Within minutes, they had Sophia on a collapsible stretcher. As they prepared to move her, she reached out toward James. Wait, she said, her voice stronger now. The men paused, exchanging glances, but following her implicit command. James, thank you. You didn't have to stop, but you did. He stepped forward, Emma still holding his hand. Anyone would have done the same. A sad smile crossed her face. No, they wouldn't. Most people would have called for help and kept walking. You brought me into your home. You treated me like a person, not a name. She glanced around the cabin, her eyes lingering on the bookshelves, the simple furniture, the drawings on the refrigerator. I won't forget this. The lid security man cleared his throat discreetly. Ms. Mitchell, we need to go. The doctor is waiting. She nodded and looked once more at James and Emma. Goodbye, and thank you again, both of you. Then they were gone, the door closing behind them as they carried her out into the rain. James and Emma moved to the window, watching as the stretcher was loaded into the helicopter. The rotors began to turn faster, the sound growing to a deafening roar, before the aircraft lifted into the stormy sky, its lights visible for only a few moments before disappearing into the darkness. The silence that followed seemed almost unnatural after the chaos of the past few hours. Emma leaned against James's side, her small voice barely audible above the continuing rainfall. Daddy, was she really a princess or something? James exhaled slowly, his mind still processing everything that had happened. Something like that, baby. Will we ever see her again? He looked down at his daughter, her eyes wide with wonder and curiosity. Then he gazed out at the darkness where the helicopter had vanished, carrying Sophia Mitchell back to a world so different from their own. I don't know, Emma. I really don't know. But something told him this wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning. The forest had never felt so still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath in the days after Sophia Mitchell vanished into the stormy sky. James Walker stood at the edge of the porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the mist curl above the tree line like something alive and restless. In the distance, the faint sound of a woodpecker tapped rhythmically like a heartbeat echoing across a hollow chest. He sipped the coffee, though it had gone cold, and replayed the events of that evening in his mind for the 100th time. Sophia Mitchell. The name still felt unreal, like a character from a movie, rather than someone who had lain on his couch vulnerable and human. James had searched her name online during a quiet moment at the garage. The articles painted a picture of a brilliant but intensely private woman who had inherited Mitchell Tech after her father's death 3 years ago. She rarely gave interviews, never attended galas, and was rumored to spend more time in research labs than boardrooms. The town library's ancient computer had shown him images of a polished corporate executive in tailored suits. Nothing like the woman in hiking boots with dirt on her jeans who had thanked him for treating her like a person. Emma spoke of her constantly wondering aloud if Sophia liked blueberry pancakes or if she had a dog, creating an elaborate mythology around their brief encounter. James gently reminded her that Sophia belonged to a different world, one that would likely never intersect with theirs again. He was wrong. The package arrived exactly 1 week after the incident. Martha Williams from the general store handed it to him with raised eyebrows and poorly concealed curiosity. Special courier brought this, she said. Must be important. The brown paper parcel bore no return address, just his name in elegant handwriting. James opened it at the kitchen table that evening after Emma was asleep. Inside lay a leather-bound book. The Golden Age of Flight Illustrated Engineering Marvels, 1935-1975. It was a rare collector's edition he had once mentioned to a colleague as his dream reference book, something he could never justify purchasing. Tucked between the pages was a simple cream-colored card. The handwriting matched that on the package. For the man who saved more than a life. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. See, James ran his fingers over the embossed illustrations of aircraft that had revolutionized travel designs that had once inspired his own work. The book represented something he had left behind. Not just a career, but a passion. He placed the card back between the pages and closed the book carefully, unsure what to make of this gesture from a woman whose life was valued in billions. 3 days later, a jar of honey arrived, crystal clear amber liquid with a handwritten label, Blue Ridge Apiary, small, batch summer harvest. Another note accompanied it. This comes from my grandmother's beekeepers. You mentioned pancakes needing something real. As James stared at the jar for a long time, remembering a throwaway comment he'd made while treating her ankle about how he made Emma pancakes every Sunday with real ingredients, not the artificial syrups from the store. She had been listening, really listening. Henry Thompson stopped by that weekend bringing an old phonograph record for Emma, Creedence Clearwater Revival's Green River, that he thought she might enjoy. The older man noticed the book immediately, his historian's eye drawn to rare items. "Where did you get this?" he asked, carefully turning the pages with reverent fingers. "This edition is practically unobtainable." James hesitated before answering truthfully. Henry's bushy eyebrows shot up toward his hairline. "The Sophia Mitchell, James. Do you have any idea what this means?" "It means she's grateful I helped her," James replied, keeping his voice neutral. "Nothing more." Henry gave him a look that had probably intimidated generations of history students. "A woman like that doesn't send personal gifts to strangers unless it means something. Trust me, I've taught enough human history to recognize patterns." Later, after Henry had gone home and Emma was engrossed in a puzzle, James found himself standing in front of the Mustang in the garage. He pulled the tarp back and ran his hand along the fender, the cool metal familiar under his palm. "What do you think, Dad?" he asked the empty garage, a habit he'd developed over years of working on his father's prized possession. "Am I reading too much into this?" The car, of course, didn't answer, but as he stood there in the quiet garage with evening light filtering through dusty windows, James realized he was smiling. Really smiling, for the first time in weeks. The next morning brought reality crashing back. A certified letter arrived from a law firm representing Rebecca's parents. Formal language couched the message, but the intent was clear. They were initiating proceedings for partial custody of Emma, citing concerns about her educational opportunities and James's financial stability. James read the letter 3 times at the kitchen table, his knuckles white around his coffee mug. The timeline gave him 30 days to respond or face a court date. His modest savings wouldn't cover proper legal representation, not if this became a prolonged battle. The letter joined a growing pile of concerns. Old Joe had confirmed his plans to retire by December, with no buyer for the garage in sight. The elementary school principal had called to discuss Emma's disruptive questions in class, apparently challenging her teacher's assertion that dyslexia was just a lack of focus was considered inappropriate behavior. That afternoon at the garage, James struggled to concentrate on a transmission repair as his mind cycled through worst-case scenarios. The radio played Billy Joel's Piano Man as he worked the familiar melody, usually a comfort, but now just background noise to his churning thoughts. "You're a million miles away today," Old Joe commented, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that had probably been red once decades ago. "That head gasket giving you trouble." "It's not the car," James admitted, straightening up and stretching his back. "Just life." Joe nodded sagely. At 72, with a face weathered by Montana winters and hands gnarled from decades of mechanical work, he had the quiet wisdom of someone who had seen it all without needing to say much about it. "Life's like these old engines," he said, patting the bumper of the '78 Chevy they were working on. "Sometimes it runs smooth, sometimes it knocks and pings. Either way, it keeps going till it doesn't." James smiled despite himself. "That's either profound or depressing, Joe." "Why not both?" The old man chuckled. "Speaking of engines that won't quit, heard a rumor that someone's been asking about buying this place. Probably nothing but thought you should know." James's head snapped up. "What who?" Joe shrugged. "Some corporate type from Seattle. Probably wants to turn it into one of those fancy coffee shops where they charge $6 for what I brew in a tin pot." The news should have been welcome. A buyer meant the garage might stay open, that James's job might be secure. But something about a corporate type from Seattle sent an uneasy feeling through him. He dismissed it as paranoia. Sophia Mitchell surely had better things to do than meddle in his life. When James picked Emma up from school that afternoon, her usually bright face was clouded. She climbed into the truck without her typical chatter about the day's events, clutching her backpack to her chest like a shield. "Everything okay, Hummingbird?" he asked, using the nickname that usually made her smile. She shook her head, keeping her eyes fixed on the dashboard. Did something happen at school? After a long moment, she reached into her backpack and pulled out a crumpled paper. James smoothed it on the steering wheel, a drawing of a woman with dark hair standing beside what looked like their cabin. Written across the top in careful if uneven letters, "The lady who came from the sky." "Ms. Peterson said I was making things up," Emma said, her voice small. "She said I should draw real things, not fairy tales." James felt a familiar anger rise in his chest. "You weren't making anything up." "That's what I told her." Emma's eyes flashed with indignation. But then Jason said I was a liar and everyone laughed, and Ms. Peterson said we shouldn't talk about it anymore. James took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. Sometimes people don't understand things that are different from their everyday life, but that doesn't make them any less true. He handed the drawing back to her. This is beautiful, Emma, and it's real. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. She took the paper, folding it more carefully this time. Do you think she remembers us, Daddy? The question caught him off guard with its innocent directness. I think she does, he answered honestly. I really think she does. That night, after tucking Emma in, James sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad attempting to draft a response to the custody letter. The words wouldn't come. How could he explain on paper that taking Emma away from this place, away from him, would undo all the healing they'd managed in the past 5 years? How could he convince a judge that his daughter's best interests weren't measured in dollars or prestigious schools? Outside, an owl called into the darkness. James set down his pen and walked to the window, staring out at the silhouettes of pine trees against the starlit sky. Somewhere out there in a world of corporate boardrooms and private helicopters, did Sophia Mitchell ever look up at the same stars and remember the cabin in the woods? The thought seemed fanciful, something from the realm of Emma's imagination rather than his practical mind. Yet the book and honey on his shelf suggested otherwise. In the stillness of the Montana night, James Walker felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not just longing, but possibility. Autumn painted the valley in shades of amber and russet, the aspens shimmering gold against the dark green of the pines. James spent a Saturday morning splitting firewood, the rhythmic swing of the axe clearing his mind as each log split cleanly along the grain. Emma sat nearby on the porch steps, carefully folding a paper into the origami cranes she had been obsessively creating since learning about them in a library book. Daddy, how many is 1,000? She asked, adding another finished crane to the growing collection lined along the porch railing. More than you can count in one breath, he answered, setting another log on the chopping block. Why, the book says if you fold 1,000 paper cranes, you get to make a wish that comes true. Her small fingers worked with surprising dexterity for a 6-year-old, creasing the paper with solemn precision. I'm going to make a wish. Must be a pretty important wish. She nodded seriously but didn't elaborate, and James didn't press. Some things were private, even between fathers and daughters. The sound came unexpectedly. Tires on gravel and engine slowing as it approached the cabin. Not Henry's ancient pickup with its distinctive rattle, nor Martha Williams's delivery van that sometimes brought groceries to the more remote homes. James set down the axe and moved toward the front of the cabin, instinctively positioning himself between the approaching vehicle and Emma. A forest green Jeep Cherokee rolled to a stop beneath the old oak tree. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened and a woman stepped out. She wore jeans, hiking boots, and a soft blue sweater that matched the autumn sky. Her dark hair was tied in a loose braid over one shoulder, and she carried nothing but a small leather backpack slung over one arm. No security detail, no helicopter, no corporate entourage, just Sophia. James stood motionless, momentarily certain he was imagining her presence. Then Emma's voice broke the spell. Miss Sophia, she cried, dropping her paper crane and racing down the porch steps. Sophia knelt just in time to receive the little girl's enthusiastic embrace, laughing as Emma's momentum nearly knocked her over. Hello, Emma, she said, hugging her back just as tightly. I missed you, ma enfant. I missed you too. Did your leg get better? Do you want to see my cranes? I'm making 1,000 for a wish. Sophia stood, keeping one arm around Emma's shoulders as she looked up at James, who still hadn't moved from the top of the porch steps. Her smile faltered slightly, uncertainty crossing her features. I should have called first, she said. I'm sorry for just showing up. James found his voice at last. You always just show up out of nowhere. The words came out more gruffly than he intended, but the slight curve of his lips softened them. Only when I owe someone pancakes, she replied, and the tension dissolved like morning mist. Inside the cabin, Emma proudly showed Sophia her collection of paper cranes while James made coffee, stealing glances at their visitor. She looked different from the pale, pain-stricken woman he'd carried through the forest, and markedly different from the corporate executive in the online photos. There was color in her cheeks, a relaxed set to her shoulders. She seemed both more substantial and more at ease, as if she had found solid ground after a long period of drifting. How's the ankle? He asked, setting a mug of coffee in front of her. Good as new, she replied, then smiled wryly, though I've developed a healthy respect for hiking trails and watching where I step. Smart, he said, returning the smile. Most people need to get bitten twice before that lesson sticks. Emma tugged at Sophia's sleeve. Do you want to see my treehouse? Daddy built it last summer. It has a real roof and everything. Sophia looked at James, a question in her eyes. He nodded. Just be careful on the ladder. As they watched Emma race ahead through the back door, Sophia's expression grew serious. I really am sorry for dropping in unannounced. I just needed to see for myself that this place was real, that you were real. She wrapped her hands around the coffee mug. The past few weeks have been intense. I can imagine, James said, though in truth he couldn't begin to comprehend the pressures of her world. Corporate takeovers and billion-dollar decisions. She laughed, but the sound held little humor. More like fending off my uncle's attempts to restructure the company away from our sustainable energy projects and toward more profitable ventures. She made air quotes around the word. Victor believes Mitchell Tech should focus exclusively on what makes the most money in the shortest time. I disagree. Hence the snakebite, you were literally running away from the problem. Sophia's eyes widened momentarily before she caught the gentle teasing in his tone. Not my most strategic move, I admit. I just needed space to think without 20 advisors talking in my ear. She glanced around the cabin's main room, taking in the bookshelves, the simple furniture, the large windows framing views of the forest. This place, it has clarity, like it filters out all the noise. James understood exactly what she meant. It was why he had chosen this life after Rebecca's death, to find a place where essential truths couldn't be buried under complications. You're welcome to stay, he found himself saying. For dinner, I mean, or longer if you need the quiet. The offer surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise her. I'd like that, she said softly, if you're sure I'm not imposing. Before he could respond, a crash of thunder shook the cabin, followed immediately by Emma's footsteps pounding up the back steps. Storm's coming, she announced breathlessly as she burst through the door. Can we still show Miss Sophia the treehouse later? James moved to the window. Dark clouds had gathered over the mountains with remarkable speed, a late autumn storm rolling in ahead of schedule. Looks like a big one, he said, mentally reviewing his storm preparations. The solar batteries were fully charged, the generator had been serviced, and they had plenty of firewood. Might be more than just dinner if these roads flood. Sophia stood beside him at the window, watching the approaching weather front with an odd expression. Not concern, but something like satisfaction. I guess I'm staying then, she said, and James couldn't help but wonder if she had checked the weather forecast before driving up the mountain. The storm arrived with theatrical fury, sheets of rain driven sideways by gusting winds that made the pines sway like dancers. Inside, James lit the wood stove and lanterns as a precaution against power loss, while Emma helped Sophia set the table for dinner. The domestic scene struck James as surreal. Sophia Mitchell, whose net worth probably exceeded the GDP of small nations, carefully placing forks beside the mismatched plates that had come with the cabin. I make a mean venison stew, he said, stirring the pot that had been simmering all afternoon, though I can't promise it meets billionaire standards. Sophia rolled her eyes. I eat cereal for dinner most nights when I'm alone. R&D doesn't leave much time for cooking. R&D, Emma asked, arranging napkins with careful precision. Research and development, Sophia explained. It's where we create and test new ideas. My favorite part of the job, actually. Like inventing things? Emma's eyes widened with interest. Exactly like that. Right now, we're working on batteries that can store solar energy for much longer than current technology allows. It could help people in remote areas have reliable electricity. Like us, Emma asked. Our power goes out all the time in storms. Sophia smiled. Exactly like you. That's why it matters. Real people in real places, not just numbers on a spreadsheet. James watched the exchange with growing curiosity. This wasn't the corporate executive he had imagined, obsessed with profit margins and market share. This woman spoke about technology with the same passion he once had for aircraft design, as something that could make a meaningful difference in people's lives. The power flickered once, twice, then stabilized as the storm raged outside. They ate dinner by lamplight, the warm glow casting their faces in gentle shadow while rain drummed against the roof. Emma kept Sophia entertained with stories about school, carefully omitting the difficulties she faced with reading. James noticed, but didn't correct her. Children develop their own protective strategies. After dinner, as Emma worked on another paper crane at the coffee table, Sophia helped James with the dishes. Another surreal domestic tableau. "You don't have to do this," he said as she dried a plate with careful attention. "I want to, she replied simply. "It's grounding. Washing dishes grounds you." He couldn't keep the amusement from his voice. "You'd be surprised what grounds you when most of your life is theoretical." She placed the dried plate in the cabinet. Investment strategies, market projections, shareholder expectations, none of it has substance you can touch. She held up a glass, examining it in the lamplight. "This is real. Water soap glass. Cause and effect on a scale I can see." James understood completely. It was why engine repair satisfied something in him that engineering schematics never had: the tangible results of work done with his hands. As they finished the dishes, the lights flickered again and then went out entirely, leaving only the warm glow of the wood stove and kerosene lamps. "And there it goes," James said without surprise. "Emma, can you bring me the flashlight from the drawer?" She obliged, and James moved toward the back door. "Need to check the generator, make sure it switches over properly." "Can I help?" Sophia asked, and something in her tone made it clear she wasn't just being polite. James hesitated, then nodded. "Grab that raincoat by the door. It'll be wet out there." They dashed through the downpour to the shed where the backup generator was housed. James flashed the light over the control panel, frowning at what he saw. "Fuse is blown. Got spares, but this model's temperamental even in good weather." He opened the access panel and pointed to the problem. To his surprise, Sophia leaned in beside him, her eyes quickly assessing the wiring. "Is that a modified Westbrook G200? The commercial model?" James stared at her. "How did you—" "Mitchell Tech acquired Westbrook Power Systems last year. I toured their production facilities." She smiled at his expression. "I like to understand what my company actually makes. Mind if I take a look?" He handed her the flashlight and watched as she examined the generator with practiced eyes, her fingers tracing connections with confidence. "The problem isn't just the fuse," she said after a moment. "There's corrosion on this junction box. It's causing resistance that's probably what blew the fuse in the first place." She looked up at him. "Do you have electrical tape and a wire brush? I can clean this while you replace the fuse." Working together in the small shed, rain pounding on the metal roof above them, they repaired the generator in half the time it would have taken James alone. When Sophia reconnected the final wire and the machine hummed to life, she smiled with genuine satisfaction. "Not bad for a CEO," James remarked as they prepared to dash back to the cabin. "Engineer first, CEO second," she corrected him. "Always." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, a kinship beyond their different circumstances. They were both people who understood how things worked, who found meaning in solving practical problems. Back inside, they found Emma asleep on the couch, surrounded by colorful paper cranes, the strain of the day finally catching up with her small body. James carried her to her bedroom, while Sophia waited in the living room, warming her hands by the wood stove. When he returned, she was studying the bookshelves, her finger tracing the spines of technical manuals, interspersed with classic literature. "Quite the collection," she observed. "Aerodynamics next to Steinbeck." "My father was a science teacher who loved great stories," James explained, joining her by the shelves. "Said both were essential to understanding the world." "Smart man." She pulled out a well-worn copy of The Grapes of Wrath. "This was my mother's favorite. She used to read it every summer." "Used to." "She died when I was 12. Cancer." Sophia replaced the book carefully. "My father buried himself in the company afterward. I think work was the only language of grief he understood." The simple statement carried years of loneliness within it. James recognized the emotion all too well. "I did something similar after Rebecca died," he admitted. "Except I ran away from work instead of toward it. Probably not the healthier choice." "You ran toward Emma," Sophia said. "That was exactly the right choice." The power came back on suddenly, ceiling lights blazing to life and startling them both. The modern convenience seemed almost intrusive after the intimate atmosphere of the lamplight. Sophia moved toward the window, watching the storm continue its assault on the landscape. "I was engaged once," she said after a long silence, her back still turned to him. 3 years ago, Thomas Harrington, finance genius, impeccable family connections, said all the right things. James didn't respond, sensing she needed to simply speak the words aloud. Halfway through planning the wedding, I overheard him on the phone with his brother. Her voice remained steady, but her shoulders tensed. He said, "Once we're married, I'll have enough influence to redirect her father's pet environmental projects. Those solar farms are burning cash we could be using for market expansion." She turned to face James, her expression a complex mixture of old pain and hard-won wisdom. He didn't love me. He loved the idea of me, what I represented. Control, power, a bank vault with legs. "What did you do?" James asked quietly. "I called it off the next day. My father threatened to cut me out of the trust. The board panicked. Lawyers circled like sharks." A small, fierce smile crossed her face. "But I walked anyway. First good decision I made in years." They stood in silence after that, not the awkward kind, but the comfortable quiet of two people who understood something essential about each other. "You're not just some billionaire," James said finally. She tilted her head questioningly. "You're a woman who showed up in the middle of nowhere with nothing but a backpack and a scraped-up soul. And you didn't give up." He held her gaze steadily. "That counts for more than any trust fund ever will." Her smile trembled at the edges. "You see too much." "I see just enough." Outside, the storm continued its symphony of wind and rain, but inside the cabin, something new had taken root. Fragile but growing stronger with each passing moment. Not quite love, not yet, but the foundation upon which it might one day build. Dawn broke clear and fresh, the storm having spent its fury overnight. Droplets of water sparkled on pine needles and spider webs, turning the forest into a kingdom of diamonds under the morning sun. James woke early, as was his habit, and moved quietly through the kitchen, preparing coffee. He was surprised to find Sophia already awake, sitting on the front porch, wrapped in one of the cabin's old quilts, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. "You're up early," he said, offering her a steaming mug. "Never really went to sleep," she admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Too much thinking." He sat beside her on the porch step, his own mug warming his hands in the crisp morning air. They watched the valley come alive in comfortable silence. Birds returning to feeders, mist rising from the distant creek, a deer and her fawn picking their way carefully across the clearing. "It's like a different planet from Seattle," Sophia murmured. "Better or worse? Just different and more honest, maybe." She sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "Seattle moves so fast that sometimes you forget to ask where you're actually going." Emma burst through the front door before James could respond, her hair wild from sleep, but her eyes bright with excitement. "You're still here," she exclaimed, throwing herself into Sophia's lap without hesitation. "Storm trapped me," Sophia explained with a laugh, steadying her coffee mug to avoid spills. "Looks like I'm yours for the day. Can we make pancakes and go to the market? Saturday is market day." James chuckled at his daughter's enthusiasm. "Let our guest at least finish her coffee." "Hummingbird." "Actually," Sophia said, setting her mug aside, "pancakes sound perfect." I did promise, after all. The morning unfolded with domestic warmth that seemed to surprise Sophia at every turn. She helped Emma measure flour for pancakes, laughing when a cloud of it puffed up to dust both their faces white. James showed her his trick for getting perfectly round shapes, using a metal ring as a guide, and soon they had a stack of golden pancakes drizzled with the honey she had sent. "These are way better than the fancy brunch places in Seattle," Sophia declared, cutting into her third pancake. "What's your secret?" "Buttermilk," James said, "and cast iron that's older than all of us combined." "My great-grandmother's." After breakfast, they drove into Riverstone for the Saturday market. The small town square transformed each weekend into a bustling hub of local commerce. Farmers with produce, artisans with handcrafted goods, food vendors filling the air with enticing aromas. James watched with amusement as Sophia blended seamlessly into the crowd. Nothing about her suggesting the corporate power she wielded in another life. She wore borrowed jeans and one of his flannel shirts over her sweater, her hair still in the casual braid from yesterday. No one gave her a second glance. Just another visitor enjoying the local color. At the Henderson's produce stand, Emma carefully selected apples, holding each one up for Sophia's approval before placing it in their basket. Mr. Henderson, a third-generation farmer, with hands like tree bark, chatted about the unusual weather patterns while bagging their selections. "Never seen a fall like this one," he remarked. "Hot days, cold nights, storms coming in from the wrong direction. Makes growing tricky." "Climate shifts," Sophia said, examining a particularly perfect Honeycrisp apple. "We're seeing it everywhere now." "You an environmental scientist?" Henderson asked, interest piqued. "Something like that," she replied with a small smile. James caught her eye and suppressed a grin. They wandered through the market, stopping at various stalls. Sophia purchased hand-dipped candles from Mrs. Peterson, carved wooden spoons from Old Tom Willis, and a jar of blackberry jam that Emma insisted was the very best in the whole world from Mrs. Williams. At a stall selling antique items and collectibles, Sophia paused, her attention caught by a display case of vintage mechanical watches. "My father collected these," she said, leaning down to examine a particular model. "He said modern electronics would never have the soul of pure mechanics." The stall owner, a woman in her 70s with silver hair and bright eyes, nodded appreciatively. "Smart man. This Hamilton was made in 1956. Still keeps perfect time. No batteries, no circuits, just craftsmanship." "How much?" Sophia asked. "For that 1,300. It's worth twice that, but I price for people who'll love them, not just lock them away." Without hesitation, Sophia purchased the watch, handling it with reverent care as the woman placed it in a small velvet pouch. "Gift?" James asked as they walked away. Sophia shook her head. "Reminder of what lasts." Their last stop was the old record store on the corner of Main Street, a relic from another era that somehow survived in the age of digital music. The bell above the door jingled as they entered, and the scent of aging paper and vinyl enveloped them. Emma immediately headed for the back corner, where the owner, Jerry, kept a box of discount records specifically for children to browse. "Haven't seen you folks in a while," Jerry called from behind the counter, where he was repairing a turntable. In his 60s, with a gray ponytail and concert t-shirt from a 1978 Eagles tour, he embodied the spirit of his store. "Been busy," James replied. "This is Sophia, a friend visiting from Seattle." Jerry nodded in greeting. "Seattle, huh? Still got some good record shops there, I hear, though. Not like the old days." "Unfortunately, I don't get much time to explore them," Sophia admitted. She wandered along the aisles, fingers trailing over album covers with evident curiosity. "My experience with vinyl is limited to whatever my mother played when I was little. Mostly classical." "Never too late to expand your horizons," Jerry said, setting down his screwdriver. "What kind of music speaks to you?" Sophia looked momentarily bewildered by the question. "I don't really know. I mostly listen to whatever's playing in the background at events." Jerry shook his head as if she'd admitted to a serious character flaw. "That's not listening to music, that's being in the same room with it." He emerged from behind the counter. "Let me introduce you to some possibilities." For the next half hour, Jerry guided Sophia through a musical education, pulling albums from various sections and explaining their significance with the passion of a true aficionado. James and Emma joined them, Emma sitting cross-legged on the floor as Jerry played snippets on the store's vintage sound system. "This," Jerry said reverently, placing a Bruce Springsteen album on the turntable, "is The River, 1980. Listen to how he captures working-class America, the dreams, the struggles, the moments of joy." The opening notes of The Ties That Bind filled the store, and James watched Sophia's face as she listened. Really listened, perhaps for the first time. Something in the music seemed to reach her, her expression softening with recognition. "I'll take it," she said when the song ended. "And the Fleetwood Mac one, too. And maybe the Johnny Cash." Jerry beamed as if he'd personally won a convert to a religious cause. By the time they left the store, Sophia carried a bag containing 6 carefully selected albums and a promise to return for more musical education on her next visit. "I haven't bought physical music since I was in college," she admitted as they walked back to the truck. "Everything's been digital for so long." "Convenient, but soulless," James suggested. "Exactly." She looked down at the record bag. "These feel like they have history, like they matter." "They do," James agreed. "Each one captures a moment in time that meant something to someone. That's why they last." The afternoon found them back at the cabin, where James suggested they continue working on the Mustang while the good weather held. To his surprise, Sophia readily agreed, changing into older clothes before joining him in the garage. I warn you, I haven't done mechanical work since college engineering labs, she said as he rolled out the tool cart. It's like riding a bike, he assured her. The principles don't change, just the applications. He was right. Within minutes, Sophia had familiarized herself with the Mustang's engine layout, asking intelligent questions about the restoration process and offering observations that revealed her technical background. The 289 V8 was revolutionary for its time, she said, leaning over the engine compartment. Compact design, reliable power delivery. They built things to last back then. Unlike today's disposable everything, James agreed, handing her a wrench. Can you loosen that bolt while I hold this bracket? They worked side by side for hours, talking intermittently about engineering principles, the history of American automotive design, and James's plans for completing the restoration. Emma joined them, occasionally handing tools or simply watching with fascination as the adults transformed greasy metal parts into something functional and beautiful. My father would have loved this, Sophia said, as they took a break sitting on overturned buckets with cold lemonade that Emma had proudly prepared. He started in a garage, before Mitchell Tech became what it is today. Two guys with big ideas and not much money building prototype batteries in a rented space not much bigger than this. What happened to the other guy? James asked. Victor Mitchell, my uncle. A shadow crossed her face. He's still with the company, but we have different visions for its future. Before James could inquire further, Emma tugged at Sophia's sleeve. Can you play piano? We have one, but it's super old, and Daddy doesn't know how. The upright piano in question stood in the corner of the living room, a family heirloom that had come with the cabin. James had it tuned annually out of respect for tradition, but neither he nor Emma had the skills to make proper use of it. I took lessons for years, Sophia admitted as they moved inside, though I'm probably very rusty now. She sat at the bench, running her fingers lightly over the yellowed keys. After a moment's hesitation, she began to play, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. The melody was something classical that James didn't recognize, but its beauty filled the cabin like sunlight. Emma stood transfixed beside the piano, watching Sophia's hands move across the keys with a grace that transformed her from businesswoman to artist in an instant. Could you teach me? Emma asked when the piece ended. Sophia looked surprised, then touched. I'd love to. We can start with the basics right now if you'd like. James watched from the kitchen doorway as Sophia patiently showed Emma how to position her small hands, explaining notes and keys with the same clarity she had probably once used in corporate boardrooms. Emma's face was a study in concentration, her dyslexia forgotten as she discovered a new language that didn't require reading traditional text. The simple scene affected James more deeply than he expected. This woman who commanded resources beyond his imagination was sitting in his modest cabin, covered in engine grease, teaching his daughter to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star with infinite patience. The contradiction was as beautiful as it was unexpected. As evening approached, James prepared a simple dinner while Sophia and Emma continued their piano lesson. The domestic rhythm felt so natural that he had to remind himself how extraordinary the situation actually was. Sophia Mitchell, heir to a technology empire, was temporarily inhabiting their life, as if she had always been a part of it. After dinner, they sat on the porch to watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. Emma, exhausted from the day's activities, dozed against Sophia's side, her small body trusting and relaxed. Thank you, Sophia said softly, careful not to disturb the sleeping child. For what? For this, for letting me be here, be part of this. She gestured toward the valley, the forest, the simple cabin behind them. I haven't felt this present in years, maybe ever. You fit here, James said simply, more than you might realize. Their eyes met in the fading light, a moment of connection that needed no words to express its significance. Something was building between them, something neither had expected, but both now recognized as valuable beyond measure. The moment was interrupted by the distant sound of an approaching vehicle, headlights appearing on the winding road that led to the cabin, moving with purpose rather than the casual pace of a neighbor dropping by. James felt Sophia tense beside him. Are you expecting someone? She asked, her voice suddenly alert. No, he replied, standing to get a better view of the approaching car. Even at a distance, he could tell it wasn't local. The black SUV gleamed with the polished perfection of luxury and power, completely out of place on the rutted dirt road. Threat emerges. The SUV pulled to a smooth stop beside Sophia's Jeep, its engine purring with expensive precision before falling silent. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the rear door opened and a man stepped out. Even in the dim twilight, his presence commanded attention. Tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than James's truck, with silver-streaked dark hair and the same sharp jawline as Sophia. He surveyed the cabin with the calculating gaze of someone assessing property value rather than natural beauty. Behind him, two men in dark suits emerged from the vehicle, their posture and alertness marking them clearly as security personnel. "Uncle Victor," Sophia said quietly, gently shifting Emma's sleeping form to the porch swing before standing. Her voice carried no surprise, only resignation, as if she had been expecting this moment, even while hoping to avoid it. James glanced at her, noting how her entire demeanor had changed. The relaxed woman who had spent the day working on an engine and playing piano was gone. In her place stood someone more guarded, shoulders, straight chin lifted slightly, armor being assembled piece by piece. "Quite the scenic retreat," Victor Mitchell said as he approached the porch, his tone suggesting he found it anything but. "Though you might have chosen somewhere with cell reception if you wanted to completely disappear." "That was rather the point," Sophia replied evenly. "How did you find me?" Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The helicopter pilot from your last adventure recalled the general location. After that, it was simply a matter of locating the property owner." His gaze shifted to James, assessing him with cool efficiency. "Mr. Walker, I presume?" James nodded but didn't offer his hand, sensing it wouldn't be welcomed. "Can I help you with something?" "You've helped quite enough already, I think." The words were polite, the tone decidedly less so. Victor turned back to Sophia. "The board meeting is tomorrow morning. Your absence has been noted and not favorably. I've had to postpone critical decisions while fielding increasingly pointed questions about your whereabouts." "The board meeting isn't until Tuesday," Sophia countered, "and all outstanding decisions were delegated to the appropriate department heads before I left." Victor's expression hardened. "The meeting was moved up. If you checked your messages occasionally, you would know that." He glanced meaningfully at the cabin, the forest, the distinct lack of corporate infrastructure. "The Henderson proposal is up for a vote. Without your direct intervention, it will be approved." James watched Sophia's face pale slightly at this news. Whatever the Henderson proposal was, it clearly mattered to her deeply. "That project would undermine everything we've built in sustainable energy," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "It completely contradicts my father's vision for the company." "Your father's vision doesn't pay the dividends our shareholders expect," Victor replied smoothly. "Henderson Petrochemical is offering a partnership worth billions in immediate revenue. The board sees it as an obvious choice." "The board sees what you want them to see," Sophia shot back. "Did you bother to mention that Henderson has been cited 3 times for environmental violations, or that their clean energy claims have been debunked by every independent research group that studied them?" Victor sighed with theatrical patience. "This is precisely why we need you back in Seattle. Your passion is admirable, but it needs to be channeled through proper corporate governance, not—" He gestured vaguely at the cabin. "Whatever wilderness therapy this is supposed to be." James felt Emma stir on the swing behind them, disturbed by the tension in the adults' voices. He moved to sit beside her, placing a protective arm around her shoulders as she blinked awake. "Who's that man?" she whispered, eyeing Victor with childish suspicion. "Sophia's uncle," James replied softly. "Just rest, Hummingbird." Victor noticed the exchange and seemed to register Emma's presence for the first time. Something flickered across his face, not softening exactly, but a brief crack in the corporate facade. "You have a beautiful daughter, Mr. Walker," he said, his tone marginally warmer. "She reminds me of Sophia at that age. Always watching, always thinking." Sophia glanced back at Emma with evident concern, then stepped down from the porch to face her uncle, directly, deliberately moving the conversation away from the cabin. "I'll return for the meeting," she said, her voice low but firm. "But I'm not changing my position on Henderson. The company stays true to its environmental commitments." Victor's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. "You may find that more difficult than you expect. There have been some developments during your absence." "What kind of developments?" "The kind that require a CEO's full attention, not her occasional interest when she's not playing house in the wilderness." He checked his watch with deliberate precision. The helicopter will be here at 7 tomorrow morning. I've taken a room at the lodge in town. He turned to leave, then paused, looking back at Sophia. Your father built Mitchell Tech from nothing into something extraordinary. Don't be the one who dismantles his legacy because of idealism detached from reality. The words struck with calculated precision. James saw Sophia flinch slightly, the barb finding its mark as surely as Victor had intended. Before she could respond, her uncle had returned to the SUV, the security men falling in behind him with practiced efficiency. They watched in silence as the vehicle reversed, turned and disappeared down the road, taillights receding into the darkness like malevolent red eyes. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Emma's small voice broke the tension. Is Miss Sophia in trouble? Sophia turned, her expression softening as she looked at the concerned little girl. No, sweetie, just grown-up work problems. Nothing for you to worry about. But James could see the truth behind her reassurance. Whatever awaited her in Seattle was serious enough to send her uncle personally to retrieve her. Not a simple board meeting, but a potential turning point for her company and perhaps her entire future. They moved inside as the night air grew colder, Emma reluctantly going to bed after extracting a promise from Sophia that she wouldn't leave without saying goodbye. James prepared tea while Sophia paced the small living room, the relaxed woman of the afternoon replaced by a CEO mentally preparing for corporate battle. The Henderson deal would effectively reverse our entire sustainable energy initiative, she explained after Emma's bedroom door closed. Victor's been trying to push us toward more lucrative partnerships for years, regardless of environmental impact. He sees my father's commitment to clean energy as sentimental, rather than strategic. And what do you see it as? James asked, handing her a steaming mug. Both. She accepted the tea gratefully. Yes, my father believed in environmental responsibility, but he also understood that long-term survival means adapting to a changing world. Fossil fuels are dying. Companies like Henderson are trying to squeeze the last profits from a fading industry. She sat heavily on the couch, suddenly looking exhausted. The truth is, Victor's not entirely wrong. He helped build Mitchell Tech alongside my father. He understands the business in ways I'm still learning, and the shareholders do expect returns. But some things matter more than quarterly profits. Her eyes met his, seeking understanding. If we partner with Henderson, we become part of the problem that my father spent his life trying to solve. I can't let that happen, not even if it costs me my position. James sat beside her, the weight of her words settling between them. You really might lose control of the company. She nodded grimly. Victor's been building alliances on the board. This sudden meeting change is a tactical move. He knows I haven't had time to secure enough votes. She stared into her tea as if it might contain solutions. 3 years of work potentially undone in a single vote. Can you buy time to rally support? Maybe, if I can present an alternative that promises comparable returns without compromising our values. She ran a hand through her hair, loosening the braid that had remained tidy throughout the day's activities. I have research that shows our current path will be more profitable long-term, but Victor excels at focusing the board on immediate gains. The corporate machinations were far outside James's experience, but the underlying conflict was familiar enough. Principle versus expedience, long-term vision against short-term reward. He recognized the weight Sophia carried, the responsibility for decisions that would affect countless lives beyond her own. What does your gut tell you? He asked simply. She looked surprised by the question, as if corporate strategy rarely involves such basic instincts. That I need to fight, that this moment matters. Her voice strengthened with each word. That my father trusted me with his company because he believed I would protect what makes it valuable, not just financially, but ethically. James nodded, seeing the determination return to her eyes. Then you already know what you need to do. Yes. She set down her mug and reached for her phone, which had remained unused during her entire visit. I need to make some calls, review the latest figures, prepare counter-arguments. The CEO was fully back now, focused and resolute. Use the study, James offered, gesturing to the small room off the main living area. It's not much, but it's private, and the satellite internet should work even with the storm damage. Sophia worked late into the night, the soft glow from the study door the only sign of her presence. James checked on Emma, then sat in the living room with a book he couldn't focus on, his mind too full of the day's events and their impending conclusion. He had known from the start that Sophia's presence was temporary, a brief intersection of two vastly different worlds that could never fully merge. Yet something had changed between them, something significant enough that her inevitable departure now felt like a genuine loss rather than a return to normal. Around midnight, the study door opened, and Sophia emerged looking tired but focused. She found James still awake, waiting without admitting he was waiting. "I think I have a strategy," she said, sitting beside him on the couch. "Not guaranteed, but better than I had an hour ago." "Good." He wanted to say more, but found himself uncharacteristically hesitant, aware of boundaries being redrawn between them with each passing minute. Sophia seemed to sense his reluctance. "James, why?" she began, then paused, searching for words. "These past 2 days have meant more to me than I can express. This place, Emma, it's been like finding something I didn't know I was missing." "But you have to go back," he finished for her. Yes, the word carried resignation and resolve in equal measure. Not just because of the company, though that matters enormously, but because I have responsibilities that affect thousands of people, projects that can make real differences in the world. She looked around the cabin with evident longing. "As much as part of me wants to stay in this perfect bubble forever, I can't abandon those commitments." "I wouldn't expect you to," James said honestly. "That wouldn't be the woman who fixed my generator in a rainstorm or taught my daughter piano with infinite patience." Her smile held gratitude and something deeper. "Will you understand if I don't make promises about coming back? I want to, more than I can say. But until this situation resolves, we'll be here," James said simply. "No matter what happens with your board or your uncle or your company, this place will be here. We'll be here." It wasn't quite a declaration, not quite a commitment, but it was honest. A door left open between their worlds, neither demanding nor dismissing the possibility of a future connection. Sophia nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears that she quickly blinked away. The CEO couldn't afford such vulnerability, not with the battles ahead. "I should get some sleep. Early start tomorrow." They stood the moment, stretching between them with things unsaid but understood. Then, with a courage that had nothing to do with corporate strategy, Sophia stepped forward and kissed him. Briefly, softly, a gesture both conclusive and preliminary. "Thank you," she whispered, then turned and disappeared into the guest room before he could respond. James stood alone in the quiet living room, the brief warmth of her lips still felt on his, wondering if he had just experienced an ending or a beginning. Morning arrived with cruel efficiency, pale light filtering through the pines, as James prepared a coffee and a simple breakfast. Emma, understanding the gravity of the situation despite her youth, was subdued as she helped set the table, carefully placing a paper crane beside Sophia's plate. When Sophia emerged from the guest room, she had fully transformed back into the corporate executive the world recognized. Her casual clothes were replaced by a tailored blazer and slacks. She had apparently packed in her small backpack, her hair neatly arranged, her expression composed and professional. Only her eyes meeting James's across the kitchen revealed the woman who had played piano and fixed engines just hours before. "Is that for me?" she asked Emma, noticing the paper crane. Emma nodded solemnly. "It's special. For your wish." "Thank you." Sophia carefully tucked the delicate creation into her jacket pocket. "I'll keep it with me during the meeting." Breakfast was a quiet affair, everyday conversation impossible in the shadow of imminent departure. At precisely 6:45, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors broke the morning stillness, growing louder as the aircraft approached. "Right on time," Sophia said, standing and gathering her few belongings. "Victor's nothing if not punctual." They walked outside together, watching as the helicopter, smaller than the one from their first encounter, but no less imposing, descended toward the clearing beyond the cabin. Emma clutched James's hand tightly, her earlier stoicism crumbling as reality set in. "Will you come back?" she asked Sophia, her voice small against the growing roar of the rotors. Sophia knelt to Emma's level, meeting her eyes directly. "I will do everything in my power to come back," she said, each word deliberate and sincere. "But it might take some time. Important things sometimes do." "I'll keep making cranes," Emma declared, "until I get to 1,000, then my wish will come true." What's your wish? Sophia asked gently. Can't tell. It's a secret. But it's about you. Threw her arms around Sophia's neck in a fierce hug that was returned with equal intensity. When Sophia finally stood, her composure had slipped just enough to reveal the emotion beneath. She turned to James, who had watched the exchange with a heart both full and heavy. I don't know how to say goodbye, she admitted. Then don't, he replied simply. Just say you'll let us know when you're safe, she nodded. Understanding his deliberate step back from emotion, neither of them could afford right now. Professional respect, one engineer to another, acknowledging the task ahead. I will. With that, she turned and walked toward the waiting helicopter, her back straight, her stride purposeful. She didn't look back, and James respected her for it. Some partings were easier that way. He and Emma stood on the porch watching as the helicopter lifted into the clear morning sky, banking gently before heading west towards Seattle and all the complications that awaited there. Is she going to be okay, Daddy? Emma asked as the aircraft dwindled to a distant speck. James drew his daughter close, his eyes still fixed on the horizon where Sophia had disappeared. She's stronger than she looks, he said, and she has your crane for luck. The words sounded confident, but as they turned back toward the suddenly empty-feeling cabin, James couldn't shake the sense that something valuable had slipped through his fingers. Not just Sophia herself, but the possibility she represented, the glimpse of a life where past and future, simplicity and complexity might somehow find balance. He could only hope that whatever battles she faced in Seattle, she would find her way back to the peace she had discovered, however briefly, in a cabin in the Montana woods. The forest changed with the seasons, green giving way to gold, then to the stark beauty of early winter. Snow dusted the Montana hills like powdered sugar, transforming the landscape into something from a vintage Christmas card. Yet for all its pristine beauty, James Walker found the world strangely muted, as if some essential vibrancy had departed with the helicopter that carried Sophia Mitchell back to Seattle. 3 weeks had passed. 3 weeks of normal routines that no longer felt quite normal. James rose each morning, made breakfast, drove Emma to school, worked at the garage, and returned home to quiet evenings of homework and simple dinners. The rhythm was familiar but hollow, like a beloved song played on an instrument slightly out of tune. Emma spoke of Sophia, often incorporating her into bedtime stories and adding to her ever-growing collection of paper cranes along the windowsill. Each new creation was carefully placed in a rainbow pattern that now stretched nearly the full length of the living room window, a visible countdown to some hoped-for miracle. That's number 312, she announced one evening, placing a purple crane beside its blue neighbor. Less than 700 to go. James smiled from where he sat, reviewing bills at the kitchen table. You're making good progress, Hummingbird. I have to, she replied with the solemn certainty of childhood. Winter's coming and wishes take longer in the snow. Her simple faith both warmed and worried him. He had no way of knowing if Sophia would ever return, and the thought of Emma's eventual disappointment weighed heavily on his mind. Yet he couldn't bring himself to discourage her hope, perhaps because he nursed a similar one himself. The news from Riverstone was no more encouraging than his personal concerns. Old Joe had confirmed that the garage would close after Christmas, giving James barely a month to find new employment. The corporate type from Seattle had apparently lost interest in the property, another dead end in a growing list of financial worries. To make matters worse, Rebecca's parents had escalated their custody challenge, hiring a prestigious law firm that sent increasingly formal letters detailing James's supposed inadequacies as a parent. Their latest communication had pointed to Emma's troubling behavior at school as evidence of his failure to provide proper structure. The incident in question had occurred the previous week. Emma had been suspended for a day after physically confronting a boy who had been bullying a younger student with learning disabilities. According to the principal, she had pushed the much larger boy and told him, just because someone's different doesn't mean they're less. James had been unable to muster genuine disapproval during the mandatory parent-teacher conference. I understand that physical confrontation isn't acceptable, he had told the stone-faced principal, but standing up for others is exactly what I've taught her to do. Perhaps, the woman had replied coolly, but there are appropriate channels for reporting concerns. She's 6, James had responded, his patience fraying. She doesn't understand channels. She understands right and wrong. The meeting had ended in stalemate, but James knew it would be added to the growing file of evidence that his in-laws were compiling. A file that now included his precarious employment situation. Emma's academic struggles and their relatively isolated lifestyle. These troubles occupied his mind on a cold Tuesday morning as he drove the increasingly unreliable truck into town. The garage was nearly empty, most regular customers having already found new mechanics in anticipation of Joe's retirement. James worked methodically on an old tractor engine, the familiar task allowing his thoughts to wander. He had heard nothing from Sophia since her departure. Not that he had truly expected to. Their worlds were separated by more than just mountains and forests. Whatever battle she had faced in the Mitchell Tech boardroom had likely consumed her attention completely. For all he knew, she had lost her position and was navigating an entirely new set of challenges. Or perhaps she had won and was simply too busy implementing her vision to remember a brief interlude in a cabin in the woods. The most difficult truth was the simplest: he missed her. Not just the idea of her or what she represented, but her specific presence. The way she listened intently when Emma spoke, how she hummed unconsciously while working on the Mustang, the quiet strength that had nothing to do with her wealth or position. Henry Thompson had stopped by the cabin twice since Sophia's departure, ostensibly to drop off books for Emma, but clearly checking on James's well-being. The older man never directly asked about Sophia, but his knowing glances spoke volumes. Found something interesting at an estate sale, Henry had said during his last visit, handing James a carefully wrapped package. Inside was a detailed scale model kit of a 1940s seaplane. Thought you might enjoy building it with Emma. Good to keep the hands busy when the mind is restless. The gesture had touched James deeply. The model now sat half completed on his workbench, a project for quiet evenings when memories of Sophia threatened to overwhelm him. The bell above the garage door jingled, pulling James from his thoughts. He emerged from beneath the tractor to find a man in his 30s wearing a press badge and carrying a notebook. Clearly not a customer. "Mr. Walker," the man asked, extending his hand. "Tom Brennan, Riverstone Gazette. Got a minute?" James wiped his hands on a rag, eyeing the reporter warily. Riverstone rarely generated news worth reporting. "What can I help you with?" "Actually, I was hoping you could comment on your relationship with Sophia Mitchell." The name spoken so casually in the dingy garage hit James like a physical blow. "Excuse me, Sophia Mitchell," the reporter repeated, flipping open his notebook. "CEO of Mitchell Tech. Word is she spent some time at your cabin recently before being whisked away by helicopter. Given what's happening with the company now, I thought you might have some insights." James maintained a neutral expression through force of will. "I helped a woman who was injured hiking. I didn't know who she was until her security team arrived." The partial truth came easily. "That's the extent of it." Brennan looked disappointed but pressed on. "So you have no comment on Mitchell Tech's sudden withdrawal from the Henderson Petrochemical Partnership or the company's new rural energy initiative that was announced yesterday?" This was news to James. He hadn't followed business developments, having neither the time nor inclination for corporate politics. "Like I said, I helped someone in need. That's all there is to it." The reporter studied him for a moment, clearly sensing there was more to the story. "She mentioned you, you know." James's heart skipped a beat, though his expression remained carefully neutral. "Did she?" "Not by name," Brennan clarified. "But in her press conference about the new initiative, she said she was inspired by someone who reminded her why people matter more than profit margins. Someone who showed her what genuine community looks like." Given the timing of her mysterious Montana retreat, it wasn't hard to connect the dots. James returned to the tractor, deliberately turning his back on the reporter. "If there's no actual car trouble I can help with, I should get back to work." Brennan lingered a moment longer before accepting the dismissal. "If you change your mind about talking, here's my card. This could be quite a story." After the reporter left, James sat heavily on a work stool, his mind racing with this new information. Sophia had prevailed against her uncle, it seemed. The Henderson deal was dead. And somehow, in some way, their brief time together had influenced decisions affecting thousands of people and billions of dollars. He should have felt proud or vindicated. Instead, he felt the ache of her absence more keenly than before. That evening, after Emma was asleep, James finally gave in to curiosity and drove to the library to use their computer. He searched for news about Mitchell Tech and found multiple articles about the company's surprising reversal on the Henderson Partnership and its announcement of a new initiative focused on bringing renewable energy technology to rural communities. One article included a photo from the press conference, Sophia standing at a podium looking every inch the powerful CEO in a tailored suit, her expression composed and confident. Yet James noticed what others might miss, the small paper crane peeking from her jacket pocket, perched like a talisman against the corporate world. The sight brought an unexpected lump to his throat. She had kept Emma's crane with her, carried a piece of their world into hers. The article quoted Sophia directly. Mitchell Tech was founded on the principle that technology should serve humanity, not the other way around. Our new Rural Energy Initiative recommits us to that vision by bringing sustainable solutions to communities often overlooked by traditional energy companies. Reading between the lines, James saw the battle she must have fought and won against forces that prioritized immediate profit over long-term impact. He felt a surge of pride for her, tempered by the realization that her victory likely bound her more tightly to corporate responsibilities that would keep her firmly in Seattle. As he drove home through the quiet streets of Riverstone, snow beginning to fall in large lazy flakes, James accepted what he had been avoiding since her departure. Their worlds had touched briefly, perhaps meaningfully, but they remained fundamentally separate. The sooner he came to terms with that reality, the sooner he could move forward. Yet when he arrived home and saw Emma's paper crane silhouetted against the window, he couldn't quite extinguish the small flame of hope that flickered in his heart. After all, Sophia Mitchell had already defied expectations once. Perhaps she would again. The next morning brought news that transformed their precarious situation from worrying to dire. Old Joe called James at home, his voice grave. "Son, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I've accepted an offer on the garage. New owners take possession December 15th. That's only 2 weeks away." James said, the implications immediately clear. "I thought we had until after Christmas." "So did I," Joe sighed heavily. "But this buyer came in with cash, no conditions, and I'm not getting any younger. The deal includes clearing out all current jobs by the transfer date." "I understand," James said, though his mind was racing with calculations of savings and expenses. "You've earned your retirement, Joe. I'll make it work somehow." After hanging up, James sat at the kitchen table staring at the calendar as if it might offer solutions. 2 weeks until unemployment. 6 weeks of savings if he was exceptionally frugal. Then what Emma appeared in the doorway, already dressed for school in mismatched socks and her favorite sweater. "Is everything okay, Daddy?" He forced a smile. "Just grown-up stuff. Hummingbird. Nothing for you to worry about." He stood pushing his concerns aside for her sake. "Pancakes this morning." "Yes, please." She climbed onto her chair, arranging her school books with careful precision. "Can we put honey on this, the special kind?" The jar of honey Sophia had sent still sat in the cabinet, used sparingly for special occasions. "I think that can be arranged," James said, reaching for the mixing bowl. Some problems could wait, at least for the duration of breakfast. As they ate, Emma chattered about her plans for the day, including the school's upcoming winter concert, where she would play a simple piece on the recorder. Her enthusiasm was infectious, temporarily lifting James's spirits despite the morning's bad news. "Miss Harris says I'm getting really good at it," she said proudly between bites. "Maybe when Miss Sophia comes back, I can play for her too." James hesitated, torn between protecting his daughter from disappointment and respecting her hope. Before he could respond, a knock at the door interrupted the moment. Few people ventured up the mountain road this early, especially with snow threatening. James opened the door to find Martha Williams on the porch, bundled against the cold, holding a large envelope. "Special delivery," she said, handing it to him. "Courier came to the store first thing. Said it was urgent." James thanked her, puzzled by the formal-looking package that bore no return address, only his name in typed letters. Inside, he found 3 airline tickets to Seattle dated for the following week, along with a formal invitation on heavy cream stationery. Mitchell Tech Foundation cordially invites you to the unveiling of the Rural Energy Initiative Pilot Program. December 10th, 7:00 p.m. Mitchell Tower, Seattle. Beneath the formal invitation, a handwritten note in now familiar handwriting. "James, I've won a battle, but the war continues. I'd like you and Emma to see what you helped inspire. A car will meet you at the airport if you decide to come. No pressure, no expectations. Just an invitation to witness something important. The enclosed tickets are open-ended, so you can return whenever you choose. S.P.S. Emma's crane brought luck beyond measure. I keep it with me always." Emma appeared at his elbow, curiosity piqued by his prolonged silence. "What is it, Daddy?" James handed her the invitation, watching as her face transformed from confusion to absolute delight. "We're going to see Miss Sophia," she asked, voice rising with excitement. "In a real city with tall buildings?" "It looks that way," James replied, his own emotions a complex mixture of anticipation and apprehension. The timing seemed almost providential. With the garage closing and his future uncertain, perhaps a brief change of scenery would provide perspective. Or perhaps it would only complicate an already complicated situation. Yet as he watched Emma's face shine with joy, he knew his decision was already made. Some invitations couldn't be declined, especially when they aligned so perfectly with the wish of a little girl who believed in paper cranes and second chances. Seattle emerged from the clouds like a futuristic vision, skyscrapers reaching toward the gray December skylights, glimmering against the dark waters of Puget Sound. Emma pressed her face against the airplane window, eyes wide with wonder at the landscape so different from the Montana mountains she knew. "It's like a forest of buildings," she whispered, her breath fogging the plexiglass. "Do people really live all stacked on top of each other like that?" "They do." James confirmed his own gaze, taking in the city where he had once lived and worked before grief had driven him to the solitude of mountains. It felt both familiar and foreign now, a place he had known in another life. The flight had been Emma's first an adventure in itself. She had clutched James's hand during takeoff, her small fingers gripping tightly until the plane leveled, and her fear transformed to fascination. Now as they descended towards SeaTac Airport, that same wonder illuminated her face. James felt less certainty. The closer they came to Seattle, the more questions crowded his mind. What did Sophia expect from this visit? What did he expect? The open return tickets suggested no pressure, but his heart knew better. Something significant awaited them in the city below, something that might reshape their future in ways he couldn't predict. True to Sophia's word, a driver waited at the terminal holding a sign that simply read, "Walker." He was not the stern security type James had half expected, but a friendly middle-aged man who greeted Emma with grandfatherly warmth and insisted on carrying their modest luggage. "Ms. Mitchell arranged for you to stay at her residence," he explained as he guided them to a waiting town car. "She apologizes that she won't be able to greet you personally until tomorrow. Board meetings, you understand." James nodded, though in truth he understood little about the corporate world Sophia inhabited. As they drove through the city, Emma's excitement contrasted with his growing apprehension. The gap between their rustic cabin and this urban landscape seemed to widen with each passing block. The car eventually turned onto a tree-lined street of elegant townhouses, stopping before a brick building that managed to be impressive without ostentation. No doorman, no obvious security, just tasteful holiday decorations and warm lights glowing from within. "Here we are," the driver announced, retrieving their bags. "Ms. Mitchell's residence. Mrs. Davis, the housekeeper, is expecting you." The door opened before they reached it, revealing a woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes. "Mr. Walker and Miss Emma, welcome," she said, ushering them inside. "I'm Helen Davis. I look after things when Ms. Mitchell is working, which is most of the time, I'm afraid." The interior of the townhouse surprised James. He had expected corporate sterility, perhaps with expensive art and designer furniture chosen for impression rather than comfort. Instead, they entered a home that felt genuinely lived in. Bookshelves overflowing with well-read volumes, comfortable furniture arranged for conversation rather than show, and windows that prioritized the view of an intimate garden over the city skyline. "It's beautiful," Emma breathed, taking in the Christmas decorations that adorned the living room. Not the coordinated professional display of a corporate executive, but a personal collection that suggested years of accumulated memories. "Ms. Mitchell asked me to make you comfortable and let you know she'll join you for breakfast tomorrow," Mrs. Davis explained, leading them upstairs. "I've prepared the guest rooms, and there's dinner waiting whenever you're hungry." The guest rooms continued the theme of understated comfort, quality without ostentation, warmth without excess. Emma's room adjoined James's with a connecting door that could remain open for her security in the unfamiliar setting. "Daddy, look," Emma called from her room. "There's a place for my cranes." James joined her to find a small display shelf mounted on the wall, perfectly sized for origami creations. A note propped against it read simply, "For the continuing collection." The thoughtful detail touched him deeply. Sophia had remembered not just Emma's cranes, but the importance they held for his daughter. After settling in and enjoying the home-cooked meal Mrs. Davis had prepared, James tucked Emma into bed, her excitement finally yielding to the exhaustion of travel. "Is this where Miss Sophia lives all the time?" she asked sleepily. "I think so," James replied, smoothing her hair. "Different from our cabin, isn't it?" "It's nice," Emma mumbled, eyes already closing. "But I bet she misses the stars. You can't see them with all the city lights." Her simple observation lingered with James as he returned downstairs, drawn to the bookshelves that lined one wall of the living room. The collection revealed a side of Sophia he had glimpsed but never fully appreciated. Classics of literature mingled with technical manuals, environmental studies alongside poetry, evidence of a mind that refused to be confined to a single discipline. A particular section caught his attention: books on aviation history, aircraft design, and aerospace engineering. He pulled one volume from the shelf and found a receipt tucked inside, dated just after Sophia's visit to the cabin. She had been building this collection recently, perhaps inspired by their conversations about his former career. The discovery left him both touched and unsettled. What did it mean that she had been exploring his past interests? Was it simple curiosity or something more significant? He replaced the book and continued exploring the main floor, eventually finding a study where framed photographs offered glimpses into Sophia's life. Most were professional in nature, Sophia at ribbon cuttings with research teams accepting awards. But one frame held a more personal image: a young Sophia with a man who must have been her mentor, both wearing safety goggles and lab coats, working on what appeared to be an early battery prototype. Their identical expressions of concentration and joy told a story more powerful than any corporate biography. She was 12 in that photo. The voice startled him. James turned to find Mrs. Davis in the doorway carrying a tray with tea. "I thought you might like something warm before bed," she explained, setting the tray on a side table. "That picture was taken in Mr. Mitchell's original workshop. He used to bring her there on weekends, teaching her everything he knew about battery design. Said she had better instincts for it than most of his engineers." "You knew her father?" James asked, accepting the offered cup. "I worked for the family for over 30 years, Mrs. Davis replied with evident pride. "Saw Sophia grow from a curious little girl who took apart toasters to the woman she is today." She smiled at the photograph. "Mr. Mitchell would be so proud of her now, standing up to Victor the way she has." "It sounds like you don't approve of her uncle," James observed. Mrs. Davis's expression turned diplomatic. "Victor Mitchell is a brilliant businessman who helped build the company into what it is today, but he and Sophia's father had different visions for its future." She straightened a cushion with practiced efficiency. "Robert, Mr. Mitchell, believed technology should improve lives, not just generate profits. Victor never quite understood that distinction." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Ms. Mitchell has changed since her Montana trip. More focused, more certain. Whatever happened there seems to have reminded her of something important." Her knowing glance made it clear she suspected James's role in that transformation. It's good to see her fighting for her father's vision again. After Mrs. Davis retired for the evening, James sat alone in the study, contemplating the photograph of young Sophia and her father. He recognized in their shared expression the same passion he had once felt for his own work, the pure joy of creation, of solving problems that mattered. Somewhere in the years of corporate responsibility and boardroom battles, Sophia had perhaps lost touch with that fundamental pleasure. Had their time in Montana working on engines and playing piano and experiencing simple joys rekindled something essential? Had he, without intending to, helped her rediscover her original purpose? The thought humbled him. For all the difference in their circumstances, perhaps they had given each other something of equal value. She had reminded him that purpose could exist beyond grief, and he had reminded her why her work mattered beyond balance sheets. With that comforting symmetry in mind, James finally retired to the guest room, where dreams of mountains and skyscrapers merged into landscapes that existed nowhere but the hopeful territory of sleep. Morning arrived with soft winter light filtering through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, James was disoriented by the absence of pine-scented air and the distant calls of wildlife that typically accompanied dawn at the cabin. Instead, the muffled sounds of city traffic and the gentle hum of modern heating created an urban symphony he had almost forgotten. He found Emma already awake and dressed carefully, arranging several paper cranes she had brought from home on the shelf Sophia had provided. "Do you think Miss Sophia will like them?" she asked as James appeared in the doorway. I'm sure she will, he assured her, noting how his daughter had selected her best creations for display. Ready for breakfast. They descended to find the kitchen transformed. Where the previous evening had offered calm emptiness, now there was life and movement. Mrs. Davis was preparing what appeared to be a feast, the scent of coffee and baking filling the air. And at the center island, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed documents, sat Sophia. She looked up as they entered, her professional demeanor instantly softening into genuine warmth. "You came," she said simply, as if their arrival still surprised her despite the arrangements she had made. Emma broke the momentary stillness, rushing forward to embrace Sophia with unrestrained delight. "We flew on a plane, and I saw clouds from the top, and your house has Christmas lights that change colors." Sophia laughed, returning the hug with equal enthusiasm. "I'm so glad you approve of the decorations. I was hoping you might help me finish trimming the tree later." Only after Emma's excitement had been properly acknowledged did Sophia turn to James, her expression more measured, but no less genuine. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know it's a long way." "Thank you for the invitation," he replied, suddenly aware of how formal they both sounded, as if recalibrating their relationship in this new context. Breakfast provided a welcome structure for their initial reunion. Mrs. Davis served Belgian waffles, fresh fruit and bacon with hot chocolate for Emma, and coffee for the adults. The conversation remained light. Emma's impressions of Seattle, the Christmas activities planned throughout the city, the snow that had fallen overnight in Montana, according to the weather report. Only after Emma had been settled with a holiday craft project in the adjacent room did Sophia address the purpose of their visit. "Tonight's event is important," she said, her tone shifting to something more substantial. "The Rural Energy Initiative represents everything my father believed in. Technology that serves real communities, not just shareholders." She stirred her coffee, choosing her words carefully. "After I returned from Montana, I presented the board with a complete alternative to the Henderson Partnership, based on years of research we'd been conducting but hadn't fully developed." "And they accepted it?" James asked. "Not at first." A hint of steel entered her voice. "Victor fought hard for Henderson, but I had something he didn't expect." "What was that conviction?" Her eyes met his. "In stories. Not just data and projections, but actual examples of how our technology could transform lives in places like Pine Creek Valley. I talked about communities where power outages mean more than temporary inconvenience. They mean genuine hardship. About people who fix generators in rainstorms and teach their children resilience." James realized she had used their experiences translated into terms her board would understand. "You made it personal for them?" She nodded. "The numbers supported my position, but numbers alone rarely change minds. People do." She reached across the table, her fingers briefly touching his. "You helped me remember that." The gesture, small but deliberate, bridged the distance their different worlds had created. Before James could respond, Emma returned, proudly displaying a paper snowflake she had created. "It's for your office," she announced, presenting it to Sophia. "So you can have winter even when you're working." "It's beautiful," Sophia said with genuine appreciation. "I'll put it on my desk today." The morning passed quickly with preparations for the evening event. A stylist arrived with clothing options for both James and Emma. Not the formal attire James had dreaded, but quality pieces that respected their personal style while ensuring they would feel comfortable among Seattle's corporate elite. "I hope that's okay," Sophia said when the stylist departed. "I wanted you both to feel at ease tonight without worrying about what to wear." "It's fine," James assured her, touched by her consideration. "Though I draw the line at designer labels for a 6-year-old. "Don't worry, I specified machine washable for everything," Sophia replied with a knowing smile. "I do remember what happened with the blueberry pie." The reference to their shared memory, Emma's spectacular mishap with dessert during Sophia's visit, created another moment of connection, another thread reweaving the bond that distance had tested but not broken. In the afternoon, Sophia gave them a brief tour of the city, showing Emma the holiday displays at Pike Place Market and treating her to hot chocolate at a local cafe. Though Sophia wore sunglasses and a casual coat that somewhat disguised her identity, James noticed how several people did double takes as they passed, recognition dawning on their faces. "Does that happen often?" he asked quietly as they walked along the waterfront. "More lately," she admitted. The Henderson controversy put me in the business news, and the rural initiative announcement made the mainstream press. She shrugged slightly. It's not my favorite part of the job. Is that why you were hiking alone in Montana to escape recognition? Partly. She watched Emma run ahead to examine a street performer's display. But mostly to escape myself, I think. The version of me that had lost sight of what matters. They returned to the townhouse in late afternoon to prepare for the evening's event. As James helped Emma with the final touches of her outfit, a simple but elegant blue dress that matched her eyes, he found himself unexpectedly nervous. Not about the corporate gathering itself, but about what it represented: a glimpse into Sophia's world, a test of whether the connection they had formed in Montana could survive transplantation to this very different soil. When they descended to the main floor, they found Sophia waiting in the living room. She wore a tailored dark green suit that somehow managed to be both professionally appropriate and distinctly personal. Not the generic executive attire James had seen in press photos, but something that expressed her individual style. "You both look wonderful," she said warmly. "Ready for your first Mitchell Doe tech experience?" Emma nodded enthusiastically, twirling to show off her dress. James simply offered a smile, suddenly aware of how significant this evening might be for all their futures. The drive to Mitchell Tower took them through downtown Seattle, the city now transformed by darkness and thousands of holiday lights. Emma pressed her face to the car window, entranced by the urban fairyland, so different from their quiet Montana evenings. Mitchell Tower itself stood as an architectural statement, not the tallest building in the skyline, but perhaps the most distinctive. Its curved glass facade incorporated solar panels and wind turbines in a design that made sustainability appear not just practical, but beautiful. "My father insisted on building it this way," Sophia explained as they approached. "Everyone said it would cost too much, take too long. He said if we couldn't embody our own principles in our headquarters, we had no business promoting them to others." The main lobby had been transformed for the evening's event. Displays showcased the technology behind the Rural Energy Initiative, while screens showed simulations of how the systems would function in various environments. Staff members in Mitchell Tech Blue moved among early arrivals, explaining technical details and offering refreshments. As they entered, James noticed the immediate change in Sophia's public persona. Her posture straightened, her smile became more measured, her entire bearing projecting confident leadership. Several executives approached immediately, and she introduced James and Emma with careful neutrality. Friends from Montana who inspired aspects of the initiative, before smoothly directing the conversation back to the project itself. Emma, far from being intimidated by the corporate setting, approached the displays with fearless curiosity, asking questions that often startled the technical staff with their perceptiveness. James moved more cautiously through the space, acutely aware of the gap between this world and his own, yet finding unexpected points of connection in the technology itself. One display particularly caught his attention: a modular battery system designed specifically for remote locations with extreme weather conditions. The engineer explaining it described challenges that sounded remarkably familiar to anyone who had maintained power through a Montana winter. "This is designed to work even after sitting under 3 feet of snow," the young woman explained enthusiastically. "And the interface is intuitive enough that you don't need specialized training to perform basic maintenance." "You field tested this?" James asked. "Not yet. That's phase 2 starting next month. We're selecting pilot communities now." Before James could inquire further, a ripple of attention moved through the crowd. He turned to see a tall, silver-haired man entering the lobby. Victor Mitchell, instantly recognizable from their brief encounter in Montana. Unlike that night, Victor now wore an expression of cordial professionalism, greeting attendees with practiced charm. His gaze eventually found James' recognition and momentary surprise crossing his features before his corporate mask reasserted itself. With deliberate casualness, he made his way across the room. "Mr. Walker," he said, extending his hand, "I didn't expect to see you here." "Ms. Mitchell invited us," James replied, accepting the handshake with equal formality. "Of course she did." Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "My niece has always had an eye for unconventional perspectives." Before the conversation could continue, Sophia appeared at James's side, Emma close behind her. "Uncle Victor, I see you've reacquainted yourself with Mr. Walker." Victor nodded. "I was just expressing my surprise at his presence." James and Emma provided valuable insights into the practical applications of our technology, Sophia replied smoothly. The kind of real-world perspective that corporate headquarters sometimes lacks. Victor's gaze shifted to Emma, his expression softening slightly. And how are you finding Seattle, young lady? It's very shiny, Emma replied seriously, but you can't see the stars. Something like genuine amusement flickered across Victor's face. An astute observation. Perhaps that's why some of us lose our way in cities. He looked back at Sophia. The Henderson representatives are here. They're not pleased, as you might imagine. I didn't expect them to be, Sophia replied evenly, but they're welcome to see what real innovation looks like. A subtle tension charged the air between them, the aftermath of a battle recently fought and not entirely resolved. Victor inclined his head slightly. The presentation begins in 15 minutes. I should greet the mayor. With a final nod to James and Emma, he moved away through the crowd. Is he still angry about the Henderson deal? James asked quietly. Let's just say we've reached a professional detente, Sophia replied. He couldn't block the initiative once I secured majority board support, so now he's positioning himself as its critical oversight manager. Politics, she added with a small smile. Never quite leave the playground, just change the toys we fight over. The formal presentation took place in the building's auditorium, where Sophia took the stage with confident authority. James and Emma watched from reserved front row seats as she outlined the vision behind the Rural Energy Initiative, bringing sustainable, reliable power to communities traditionally underserved by major utility companies. Energy independence shouldn't be a luxury, she told the assembled crowd of investors, media, and political figures. It should be accessible to every community regardless of size or location. This initiative represents Mitchell Tech's commitment to that principle. As she described the technical specifications and implementation timeline, James recognized aspects of their conversations from Montana woven into her presentation, not direct references, but philosophical underpinnings about self-sufficiency, resilience, and the value of rural communities in an increasingly urbanized world. What impressed him most was how she balanced corporate language with genuine passion, never allowing technical details to obscure the human impact of the technology. This was the Sophia he had come to know in Montana, brilliant and purposeful, using her position to create meaningful change. The presentation concluded with an announcement that caught James completely by surprise. We're pleased to name Pine Creek Valley, Montana, as our first pilot community for the Rural Energy Initiative, Sophia said, displaying a map of the region on the large screen behind her. Installation will begin next month, providing state-of-the-art renewable energy systems to an area that exemplifies both the challenges and opportunities our technology addresses. A murmur ran through the audience, mostly corporate professionals for whom Montana represented a vague wilderness rather than a specific place with real inhabitants. James sat stunned, Emma clutching his hand with excitement. That's us, Daddy, she whispered loudly. She's talking about our home. As the formal presentation ended and the event transitioned to a networking reception, James found himself approached by various Mitchell Tech executives suddenly interested in his local expertise. He answered their questions about Montana winters and power needs as best he could, all the while processing the implications of Sophia's announcement. She had selected his community, their community, as the flagship project for an initiative worth millions. Was it genuine belief in Pine Creek Valley's suitability or something more personal? And did the distinction even matter if the result benefited everyone involved? He finally found a moment alone with Sophia near one of the display models, her professional smile momentarily replaced by genuine concern as she gauged his reaction. I should have told you earlier about Pine Creek, she said quietly, but the final approval only came through yesterday. It's a good thing, James assured her. The valley needs reliable power, especially in winter, but I'm surprised the board approved such a remote location for the pilot. The remoteness is precisely the point, she explained. If the technology works in Pine Creek Valley's extreme conditions, it will work anywhere. And she hesitated, then continued more softly. I wanted to give something back to the place that helped me find my way again. Before James could respond, Victor appeared with the mayor of Seattle and several prominent investors, sweeping Sophia into a conversation about municipal applications of the technology. She threw James an apologetic glance as she was led away, once again, assuming the role of Subo rather than the woman who had fixed engines and played piano in a cabin in the woods. Emma, who had been charming various executives with her straightforward questions and observations, rejoined James with a plate of desserts she had collected from the refreshment table. "Is Miss Sophia coming back to Montana with us?" she asked, offering him a chocolate-covered strawberry. "I don't know, Hummingbird," he answered honestly. "She has important work here." Emma considered this while sampling a miniature cheesecake. "But the important work is going to be in Montana now." She said so in her speech. The simple logic of childhood cut through the complications adults created. James smiled at his daughter's perspective. "We'll see. Remember, no expectations." The event concluded late, with Emma finally succumbing to exhaustion on the ride back to the townhouse. James carried her sleeping form inside, following Mrs. Davis upstairs to tuck her into bed, still wearing her party dress, too deeply asleep to bother with pajamas. When he returned downstairs, he found Sophia in the kitchen, heels discarded, pouring 2 glasses of wine. She had removed her jacket, and he noticed the paper crane still tucked in the pocket of her blouse. Emma's gift carried throughout the evening's corporate proceedings like a talisman. "Successful night?" he asked, accepting the offered glass. "Beyond expectations," she confirmed, leaning against the counter. The mayor committed to implementing similar systems in Seattle's outlying communities. 3 major investors pledged additional funding, and the Henderson representatives left early, which I count as a particular victory. She smiled, but James noticed the fatigue beneath her professional satisfaction, the slight shadows under her eyes, the tension she carried in her shoulders. "You make it look effortless," he observed, "the CEO role." "Years of practice," she replied, sipping her tablespoon. "Though tonight was easier than most. I actually believed in every word I said up there." "Has that not always been the case?" She considered the question. "I've always believed in the company's potential, but sometimes the path gets complicated, compromises accumulate. You start justifying small departures from your principles for practical reasons, then one day you're considering a partnership with Henderson Petrochemical because the quarterly numbers make sense on paper. What changed? I did." She met his eyes directly. "Montana changed me. You and Emma changed me. I remembered what it felt like to do something simply because it was right, not because it was expedient." The honesty of her answer deserved equal honesty in return. "The garage is closing," James said. Two weeks from now. Joe sold it to a developer." Sophia straightened immediately, concerned. "James, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "No reason you should have," he said, his barely touched wine aside. "I'll find something else. The important thing is taking care of Emma. The initiative will create jobs in Pine Creek Valley." Sophia said, her mind clearly working through possibilities. "Technical positions, administrative support, maintenance crews. It's not charity," she added quickly, seeing his expression. "We genuinely need people who understand the community and the conditions." "I appreciate the thought," James said carefully, "but I'm not looking for a corporate position." "What are you looking for, James?" The question was gentle but direct, extending beyond employment to something more fundamental. He considered his answer, knowing its importance. "Purpose, a way to support my daughter while doing something meaningful." And he paused, then committed to complete honesty, "a future that includes more than just survival." "I want that too," Sophia said softly. "A future with purpose beyond corporate success. Balance between responsibility and personal happiness." She set her glass down and moved closer to him. "I've been thinking about how to create that balance since I left Montana." "And have you found an answer?" "Not a complete one, but a start." She took a deep breath. "I've purchased property near Pine Creek Valley. Nothing elaborate, just land with good southern exposure for solar collection and a small house that needs work. Somewhere I can stay while overseeing the initiative implementation." The revelation stunned him. "You're moving to Montana." "Part-time," she clarified. "I'll still have responsibilities in Seattle, board meetings, corporate obligations. But I've restructured my role to allow for remote work at least half of each month." She smiled at his expression. "Modern technology makes it possible to run a corporation from almost anywhere with decent internet, even Montana." The implications unfolded in James's mind. Sophia creating a deliberate bridge between their worlds, neither abandoning her responsibilities nor remaining trapped by them. It was an elegant solution that honored both her corporate role and her personal desires. That's quite a change, he managed. Necessary change, she replied. The initiative needs hands-on leadership to succeed. And I need, she hesitated, then finished simply, more Montana in my life. The unspoken question hung between them. What exactly more Montana encompassed? Before either could address it directly, Mrs. Davis appeared in the doorway. Excuse me, Ms. Mitchell. Mr. Harrington is on the phone insisting it's urgent. Sophia's expression flickered with annoyance. Thomas has an interesting definition of urgent, usually meaning his concerns regardless of their actual importance. She sighed. I'll take it in the study. After she left, Mrs. Davis busied herself tidying the already immaculate kitchen. Mr. Harrington was her fiancé, she explained, though James hadn't asked. Still thinks he has special access privileges. Some men have trouble understanding when a door has closed permanently. The gentle warning was clear, though James sensed it came from protective concern rather than disapproval. She mentioned they were engaged, he said neutrally. Mrs. Davis nodded, wiping an invisible spot from the counter. He wanted the company more than the woman. She deserves better. Her knowing glance made it clear who she might consider better, but she said nothing more on the subject. When Sophia returned 15 minutes later, her professional mask was firmly back in place, though James could see tension around her eyes. Sorry about that. End-of-year finance questions that apparently couldn't wait until morning. Everything okay? Fine, just Thomas being Thomas. She glanced at the clock. It's late and you both must be exhausted from traveling. We should get some rest. Tomorrow's schedule is lighter, just a brief tour of the research facilities if you're interested, then whatever you'd like to see of Seattle. The shift in tone was subtle but unmistakable, a retreat to safer, more structured territory after venturing close to more personal revelations. James respected the boundary, recognizing that whatever was developing between them needed time and space to find its proper form. A tour sounds great, he said. Emma will love seeing the technology up close. As they said goodnight at the base of the stairs, Sophia hesitated, then spoke with careful deliberation. I meant what I said earlier about creating balance. I don't want to be just a guichot or just a whatever might come next. I want to be fully both. I need you to understand that. I do, James assured her. We all contain multitudes. She smiled at the literary reference. Walt Whitman, my father's favorite poet. Her expression softened with memory. He used to say that the most interesting people were those who couldn't be defined by a single label. Smart man. Yes, he was. She touched his arm briefly. Good night, James. Thank you for coming. It matters more than I can say. As he watched her climb the stairs, James recognized that whatever future they might build together would never be simple or conventional. It would require flexibility, understanding, and a willingness to create something new, rather than forcing either of them into existing patterns. The challenge was daunting. But as he thought of Emma's paper cranes and unwavering belief in wishes coming true, he found himself more hopeful than he had been in years. Some journeys were worth the complexity they demanded. The Mitchell Tech Research Facility occupied 3 floors of a separate building several blocks from the main tower. Unlike the corporate headquarters with its public-facing polish, the research space hummed with the chaotic energy of innovation. Whiteboards covered in equations, prototype components in various stages of development, and engineers engaged in intense discussions at workstations throughout the open concept floor. This is where the real work happens, Sophia explained as she led James and Emma through the facility the following morning. She wore casual clothes, jeans, and a simple sweater, and James noticed how the research staff responded to her with genuine warmth rather than corporate deference. Here she was, clearly one of them, regardless of her title. Emma moved from station to station with wide-eyed fascination, asking questions that the engineers answered with increasing enthusiasm as they recognized her genuine interest. At one point, a young researcher invited her to help test a simplified interface designed for the rural initiative, watching intently as Emma navigated the system with surprising intuition. We designed this assuming minimal technical background, the woman explained to James. Your daughter just proved it works exactly as intended. She's always been good with patterns, James replied proudly, sees connections that aren't obvious to others. As they continued the tour, James found himself drawn to a testing area where a full-scale prototype of the rural energy system was being subjected to simulated extreme weather conditions. The lead engineer, an older man with the focus intensity of a lifelong researcher, explained the challenges they were addressing. Montana winters will test every aspect of this design, he said, pointing out reinforced components and redundant systems. But that's exactly what we need. If it works there, it proves the concept for global application. You seem personally invested in the project, James observed. The engineer smiled. I grew up in rural Minnesota, spent my childhood watching my parents struggle with unreliable power during blizzards. This, he gestured to the prototype, this would have changed our lives. He glanced towards Sophia, who was showing Emma another display across the room. When Mitchell revived this project after the Henderson situation, many of us volunteered extra hours. It's not just a corporate initiative for us. It's personal. Throughout the facility, James encountered similar stories. Engineers and researchers who connected with the rural initiative on a level beyond professional obligation. Sophia had clearly built a team that shared her values, people who measured success by impact rather than just profit. As the tour concluded, Sophia was called away to handle an urgent call from an overseas partner. I'm sorry, she said, genuine regret in her expression. This shouldn't take long. Feel free to continue exploring, and I'll meet you in the main lobby when I'm finished. Left to their own devices, James and Emma wandered through the remaining research areas, eventually finding themselves in a corridor lined with photographs documenting Mitchell Tech's history. The images told a compelling story from a small workshop where Robert Mitchell and a young Victor had built their first prototypes through various expansions and innovations to the global corporation it had become. He looks like Miss Sophia, Emma observed, pointing to a photo of Robert Mitchell accepting an award for sustainable design. The resemblance was indeed striking. The same determined expression, the same thoughtful eyes. Yes, he does, James agreed, studying the progression of images that captured decades of innovation and growth. Impressive history, isn't it? The voice came from behind them, and James turned to find Victor Mitchell approaching, his expression unreadable. My brother believed in documenting every milestone, said we should never forget where we started. Your brother was clearly a visionary, James replied neutrally. Victor nodded, his gaze moving across the wall of photographs. Robert saw possibilities others missed. It made him brilliant, but sometimes impractical. I balanced that tendency by ensuring the company remained financially viable while pursuing his more idealistic goals. He focused on James with sudden intensity. A successful enterprise requires both vision and pragmatism, Mr. Walker. Something Sophia is still learning. Before James could respond, Emma spoke up. Miss Sophia is making electricity for places that need it. That seems very practical. Victor seemed momentarily taken aback by the child's direct assessment, then offered a thin smile. Indeed, and quite expensive in the short term, which is my primary concern. He turned back to James. I understand you're experiencing employment challenges in Montana. The statement revealing Victor's knowledge of James's personal circumstances carried an implicit message. Nothing remained private from the Mitchell family's reach. News travels fast, James observed calmly. Information is valuable, Victor replied with a shrug, particularly when it concerns people who suddenly influence company policy. Emma had wandered a few steps away to examine a model of an early Mitchell Tech battery, leaving the men to speak more freely. If you're implying I've manipulated Sophia's business decisions for personal gain, you're mistaken, James said, keeping his voice level despite the clear accusation. Perhaps not intentionally, Victor conceded, but my niece has always had a romantic streak beneath her analytical mind. Her father was the same way, brilliant but susceptible to emotional attachments that clouded judgment. Caring about impact beyond profit isn't a weakness, James countered. It's what makes Mitchell Tech different from companies like Henderson. A flash of genuine emotion crossed Victor's face. Not anger, but something more complex. You misunderstand me, Mr. Walker. I don't oppose the rural initiative because it's less profitable in the short term. I oppose rushing into it without proper planning because my niece had an epiphany in the woods. The assessment was reductive but not entirely unfair, and James recognized the genuine concern beneath Victor's corporate exterior. You care about the company's future. I helped build it from nothing, Victor replied, the corporate veneer slipping to reveal unexpected passion. Robert and I worked 18-hour days for years before we saw a penny of profit. When he died, I promised to protect what we'd created. For the first time, James glimpsed the man behind the executive, someone who had dedicated his life to building something meaningful, who feared seeing that legacy undermined by what he perceived as impulsive decisions. From what I've seen, Sophia shares that commitment, James said carefully. She's not dismantling what you built. She's ensuring it remains relevant for the future. Victor studied him with new consideration. You're more perceptive than I expected. He glanced toward Emma, who remained absorbed in the technological displays. For what it's worth, I believe Sophia's interest in you is genuine. I've never seen her fight for anything with the determination she showed after returning from Montana. The backhanded compliment surprised James. Before he could respond, a commotion at the end of the corridor drew their attention. Sophia had returned and her expression darkened as she spotted her uncle in conversation with James. Uncle Victor, she said, approaching with controlled tension, I wasn't aware you were visiting the research facility today. Impromptu inspection, he replied smoothly. I was just discussing company history with Mr. Walker. Your father's legacy makes for compelling conversation. I'm sure it does, Sophia said, her tone making it clear she doubted the innocence of their discussion. Unfortunately, we have other appointments this afternoon. Victor nodded, professional courtesy masking whatever he might truly feel. Of course, the board meeting tomorrow should be interesting. I look forward to the detailed implementation plan for Pine Creek Valley. With a nod to James and a surprisingly gentle smile for Emma, he departed. Once he was out of earshot, Sophia turned to James with evident concern. What did he say to you? Nothing threatening, James assured her. I think he was taking my measure, trying to understand why Pine Creek Valley suddenly matters to Mitchell Tech. She sighed, tension visible in her shoulders. Victor views anything unexpected as potentially dangerous. He prefers well-mapped terrain. He cares about the company, James observed. That's not entirely a bad thing. No, it's not, she agreed, surprising him with her balanced assessment. Victor's caution has prevented mistakes over the years. But caution can also become paralysis if it's not balanced with vision. Emma rejoined them, apparently oblivious to the undercurrents of corporate politics. The man said you're having a meeting tomorrow about our town. Sophia nodded, her expression softening. That's right. The board needs to approve the final details before we can begin installation in Pine Creek Valley. Will they say yes? Emma asked with childlike directness. I believe they will, Sophia replied, though James detected a note of uncertainty beneath her confidence. But board meetings can be unpredictable. They spent the remainder of the day exploring Seattle's tourist attractions, the Space Needle, the Aquarium Pike Place Market, again for lunch. Throughout these lighter activities, James sensed Sophia's mind partially elsewhere, likely preparing for the board meeting that would determine whether her vision for Pine Creek Valley would become reality. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, they sat in the living room before a crackling fire, the Christmas lights twinkling on the tree they had decorated together that afternoon. The domestic scene contrasted sharply with the corporate battles that occupied Sophia's professional life. Are you worried about tomorrow? James asked as she stared into the flames, lost in thought. Cautiously optimistic, she replied, setting aside the tablet where she had been reviewing presentation materials. Victor will raise concerns about cost and implementation timelines, but I have solid answers for both. The board generally defers to me on strategic direction as long as the financials make sense. And do they make sense, I mean? She smiled. They will in 5 years. That's the challenge, helping the board to see beyond quarterly results to long-term impact. James hesitated, then asked the question that had been on his mind since the previous evening. Why Pine Creek Valley specifically? There must be dozens of communities that would work as pilot locations. Sophia considered her answer carefully. Technically, several sites met our criteria, but Pine Creek Valley has a combination of factors that make it ideal. Extreme weather conditions, distance from conventional power infrastructure, and a community size that matches our initial capacity. She paused, then added with quiet honesty, and yes, personal connection was a factor. I believe in being transparent about that. Victor suggested it was an emotional decision rather than a strategic one. Victor creates false dichotomies, she replied with a hint of frustration, as if emotions and strategy must be mutually exclusive. The best decisions incorporate both. She turned to face him directly. Being in Pine Creek Valley changed my perspective. It reminded me why my father started this company, not to build an empire, but to solve real problems for real people. That's not sentimentality clouding judgment. That's reconnecting with core purpose. The passion in her voice reminded James of why he had been drawn to her from the beginning. Her ability to balance brilliant analytical thinking with genuine human connection, to see both the forest and the trees. For what it's worth, he said, I think your father would be proud of the direction you are taking the company. Her expression softened with vulnerability rarely displayed in her corporate role. I hope so. Sometimes I feel like I'm trying to translate between worlds. The corporate environment that speaks in profit margins and the real communities that need what we create. You bridge those worlds better than you realize, James assured her. I've seen how your research team responds to you, how they share your vision. That doesn't happen with leadership that's just checking boxes. She smiled, grateful for his perspective. Speaking of bridging worlds, she hesitated, then continued with careful deliberation. I meant what I said about the property near Pine Creek Valley. I'll be spending significant time there as the initiative develops. And I was hoping. The ringing of her phone interrupted the moment. Sophia glanced at the screen and grimaced. I'm sorry, it's the Tokyo office. I need to take this before tomorrow's meeting. As she stepped away to handle the call, James remained by the fire, contemplating how completely their lives had intertwined from that chance encounter in the forest. Whatever Sophia had been about to suggest would have to wait, another reminder of the competing demands that shaped her existence. When she returned nearly an hour later, the moment had passed, replaced by practical concerns about the morning's meeting. They said goodnight with the unspoken understanding that some conversations would need to wait until the immediate corporate battles were resolved. The following morning brought a return to formal business attire for Sophia and a palpable tension as they shared breakfast. Emma, sensitive to adult moods despite her age, watched Sophia with concern. Are you scared about your meeting? She asked as Sophia checked her phone for the third time in as many minutes. Not scared, Sophia replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Just focused. Daddy says being nervous means you care about doing something right. Sophia's expression softened at the child's attempt to reassure her. Your daddy is very wise. The morning proceeded according to a carefully orchestrated schedule. Mrs. Davis would take Emma to the Children's Museum, while James attended the board meeting with Sophia. His presence requested specifically to answer questions about local conditions in Pine Creek Valley that might affect implementation. As they rode the elevator to the top floor of Mitchell Tower, where the boardroom was located, Sophia transformed before James's eyes. Posture straightening, expression becoming more composed, the CEO persona settling over her like armor. Most board members are supportive, she explained in a low voice. Victor has allies, but they're outnumbered as long as I make a compelling case. Just answer any technical questions honestly. Your practical experience carries weight with this group. The boardroom intimidated despite Sophia's preparation. A vast space dominated by a gleaming table where a dozen people in expensive suits examined materials on tablets or engaged in quiet conversation. At one end, Victor Mitchell conversed with two older board members, his expression serious but not overtly hostile. Sophia was greeted with respectful nods as she took her position at the head of the table. James was directed to a chair slightly behind her, present but not part of the inner circle. The message was clear: he was a resource, not a decision-maker. The meeting began with formal protocols that James only half followed, his attention more focused on the dynamics between Sophia and the board members. He noted which ones leaned forward when she spoke, which checked their phones, which glanced toward Victor before responding to questions. When the discussion turned to the Rural Energy Initiative, Sophia presented with confident precision, outlining technical specifications, implementation timelines, and financial projections with equal facility. Her command of both minute details and broader vision impressed even those who seemed initially skeptical. Pine Creek Valley represents an ideal testing ground, she explained, displaying maps and climate data on the large screen. If our systems can withstand Montana winters and maintain reliability, we prove the concept for global application. The investment is considerable for a community of that size, observed an older woman near Victor. Wouldn't a location closer to existing infrastructure provide similar data at lower cost? A valid concern, Sophia acknowledged, but proximity to infrastructure defeats the purpose of testing true independence. Pine Creek Valley's isolation is precisely what makes it valuable as a pilot site. Victor leaned forward, his expression thoughtful rather than confrontational. The board's concern isn't just cost, Sophia, it's resource allocation. Committing significant personnel and equipment to such a remote location limits our ability to respond quickly if adjustments are needed. It was a reasonable point professionally delivered. James recognized that Victor was playing the role of prudent advisor rather than opponent, perhaps a more effective strategy than direct confrontation. Sophia nodded, acknowledging the concern, which is why we've developed a phased implementation plan with built-in assessment periods. She displayed a new slide showing the staged approach. This allows us to make adjustments before full deployment, mitigating the risks of distance while still maintaining the integrity of the test environment. The discussion continued in this vein. Technical challenges raised and addressed, financial projections, questioned and defended, implementation details examined from every angle. Throughout, Sophia maintained both composure and command, never dismissing concerns, but systematically addressing each with data-driven responses. When questions turned to local conditions, James provided practical insights about weather patterns, existing infrastructure limitations, and community needs. His straightforward assessments seemed to resonate with board members, particularly when describing real-world scenarios where reliable power made crucial differences. As the meeting approached its conclusion, Victor made one final observation. The initiative has merit, he acknowledged, but its success depends on local acceptance. What evidence do we have that the Pine Creek Valley community will embrace technology that fundamentally changes their energy systems? The question was directed at Sophia, but James found himself speaking before she could respond. Pine Creek Valley isn't resistant to change, he said, drawing all eyes to him. It's resistant to change without purpose. The community values self-sufficiency and reliability. They'll embrace technology that enhances those values rather than replacing them. He continued with growing confidence, describing neighbors who maintain generations-old skills alongside modern knowledge, who value tradition but recognize the need for adaptation. They're not looking for charity or corporate experiments, he concluded. They're looking for tools that help them build better lives on their own terms. If Mitchell Tech approaches with respect for that independence, you'll find partners, not just test subjects. A silence followed his impromptu speech. Victor studied him with new consideration, as if reassessing his initial judgment. Several board members nodded thoughtfully, apparently finding his perspective persuasive. Sophia's expression remained professional, but her eyes conveyed something deeper. Gratitude, yes, but also a kind of wonder, as if seeing yet another unexpected facet of this man who had entered her life through chance and remained through choice. The formal vote, when it came, was anticlimactic. Unanimous approval for the Pine Creek Valley pilot program, with provisions for regular progress reports and assessment metrics. As board members gathered their materials and began to disperse, Victor approached James while Sophia was engaged with other executives. Effective advocacy, he said, his tone suggesting reluctant respect. You believe in this project. I believe in what it represents, James replied. Technology that serves people rather than the other way around. Victor studied him for a moment longer. You sound like my brother. It wasn't clear whether this was criticism or compliment. Sophia has changed since meeting you, become more certain. She was always certain, James countered. Perhaps just reconnecting with what matters most. A ghost of a smile crossed Victor's face. Perhaps. He glanced toward his niece, still engaged in conversation across the room. Take care of her, Mr. Walker. She carries more weight than she allows others to see. With that cryptic statement, he departed, leaving James to wonder if he had just received a warning or a blessing from the man who had helped build the Mitchell empire. When Sophia finally joined him, her professional composure had relaxed into genuine elation. We did it, she said quietly. Full approval, no significant conditions. Pine Creek Valley is officially our first pilot community. Congratulations, James replied, sharing her satisfaction. It's a big win. It's just the beginning, she corrected, her eyes bright with purpose. Now we actually have to make it work. As they left the boardroom, Sophia was immediately surrounded by team members eager to begin implementation planning. She handled each question efficiently, already shifting from persuasion to execution mode. I need to stay for these initial meetings, she explained apologetically to James. Would you mind taking a car back to the townhouse? I shouldn't be more than a few hours. He understood. This was her element, her responsibility. The bridge between their worlds required respecting the demands of both. Of course, Emma will want to hear all about the museum anyway. She touched his arm briefly, a small gesture of connection amid the corporate bustle. Thank you for everything today. Your perspective made a difference. The afternoon passed pleasantly with Emma recounting her museum adventures in elaborate detail. She had created art projects, explored science exhibits, and made friends with two other children visiting from California. Each experience was related with the breathless enthusiasm of childhood, momentarily pushing aside James's thoughts about the morning's events and their implications for the future. Evening approached with no word from Sophia. James prepared dinner with Emma's help, the domestic activity grounding him amid the unfamiliar surroundings of the townhouse. As they set the table, Emma arranged her paper cranes as centerpieces, creating an unintentionally perfect symbol of the bridge being built between their worlds. The front door opened just as they finished, revealing a visibly exhausted but satisfied Sophia. She had changed from her formal suit to more casual clothes, as if physically shedding the corporate persona along with the attire. I'm so sorry I'm late, she said, setting down her bag. The planning sessions ran longer than expected. We saved you dinner, Emma announced proudly. Daddy made spaghetti, and I made the salad all by myself. That sounds perfect, Sophia replied with genuine appreciation. Much better than the corporate catering I've been offered all day. As they shared the simple meal, Sophia gradually relaxed the tension of the day's high-stakes meetings, easing from her shoulders. She listened attentively as Emma described the children's museum, asking questions that delighted the little girl with their specificity. Only after Emma had gone upstairs to prepare for bed did Sophia address the day's events with James. Implementation begins next month, she said, her voice betraying both excitement and lingering disbelief. Advanced teams will arrive in Pine Creek Valley to conduct final site assessments before equipment installation. That's fast, James observed. It has to be, she replied. Winter is the true test for these systems. We need them operational before the worst weather hits. She paused, then continued more hesitantly. I'll be overseeing the initial phase personally, which means spending considerable time in Montana starting in about 3 weeks. The statement hung between them, its implications extending beyond professional responsibilities. The property I mentioned, she continued carefully, it's about 15 minutes from your cabin, close enough to oversee the initiative implementation, but with enough distance to, she hesitated, searching for the right words, maintain appropriate boundaries. James recognized what she was offering. Not a dramatic life change or romantic declaration, but a thoughtful first step toward whatever might develop between them. A presence in each other's worlds without presumption or pressure. That sounds right, he said simply. For now. She nodded, relief evident in her expression. For now, she agreed. The rest we figure out as we go. Before they could discuss further, Emma called from upstairs, requesting Sophia's help with something before bedtime. The conversation paused naturally, both adults understanding that some discussions were best approached gradually with the same care they would give to any important project. The following days settled into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings exploring Seattle's attractions, afternoons where Sophia balanced work commitments with family activities, evenings of quiet conversation after Emma had gone to bed. They were building a template for how their different lives might intertwine, testing boundaries and discovering connections. On their final evening before returning to Montana, they trimmed the Christmas tree together, adding the last ornaments to its branches while holiday music played softly in the background. Emma hung her most intricate paper crane in a position of honor near the top, declaring it the wish keeper for everyone. Later, after Emma was asleep, James and Sophia sat before the decorated tree, the colored lights casting soft patterns across the room. Outside, snow had begun to fall, Seattle's rare winter gift, creating a momentary hush in the usually bustling city. When will you come to Montana? James asked, watching the snowflakes gather on the windowsill. January 10th, Sophia replied. The advance team arrives on the 8th, and I'll follow once they've completed the initial setup. She turned to him, her expression open and unguarded in a way it rarely was in her corporate role. I'm nervous about it, if I'm being honest. About the project. About everything. She smiled ruefully. The project, yes, but also this, us, whatever we're building here. It matters in a way that's both wonderful and terrifying. James understood completely. After losing Rebecca, he had believed that part of his life was permanently closed. Not just romantic possibilities, but the vulnerability that came with caring deeply about another adult. Opening that door again carried both promise and risk. I can't make promises about what happens next, he said carefully, but I can promise to be honest about whatever does happen. No corporate strategies, no hidden agendas. I'd like that, she replied softly. Honesty feels like solid ground in a life that's often built on shifting expectations. They sat in comfortable silence for a time, watching the snow continue its gentle descent outside. No dramatic declarations or defined commitments. Just two people acknowledging the path opening before them, willing to explore it together at a pace that honored both their pasts and their possible future. 1 year later, Pine Creek Valley transformed under a blanket of pristine snow, the December landscape a study in white and blue as far as the eye could see. Christmas lights twinkled from cabins scattered throughout the valley, their warm glow defying winter's chill. But unlike previous years, no homes sat dark or cold despite the season's fury. The Mitchell Tech energy systems hummed efficiently, providing reliable power, regardless of weather conditions. James Walker stood on the porch of a newly constructed workshop at the edge of town, watching as his breath formed clouds in the frigid air. The building represented both his past and future, a combination garage and engineering lab, where he divided his time between practical repairs for the community and consulting work for Mitchell Tech's ongoing rural initiatives. The Walker Workshop, as locals called it, had become something of a community hub over the past year. Farmers brought equipment for repair, local teenagers apprenticed after school, and Mitchell Tech engineers often stopped by to discuss real-world applications of their designs. The space bridged practical needs and innovation in a way that satisfied both James's mechanical skills and his engineering mind. Inside, Emma sat at a small desk in the corner office, carefully crafting what appeared to be her 1,000th paper crane. At 7, she had grown taller, her reading skills improving steadily with the help of specialized programs at her new school, a small private institution in Riverstone that specifically addressed learning differences like her dyslexia. Is it time yet? She called, setting aside her completed crane, emerald green folded with a precision that came from countless hours of practice. Almost, James replied, checking his watch. She said around 5. As if summoned by their conversation, headlights appeared on the snow-covered road leading to the workshop. The now familiar Jeep Cherokee navigated the winter conditions with practiced ease, coming to a stop beside James's truck. Sophia emerged bundled against the cold in a practical down coat and knit hat, looking nothing like the corporate executive the world knew from business magazines. She carried several wrapped packages in a briefcase, the ever-present reminder of her dual life. Sorry I'm late, she called, making her way carefully up the snowy path. Video conference with Tokyo ran long. Before James could respond, Emma burst through the door and flew down the steps, nearly tackling Sophia with an enthusiastic hug that almost sent the packages tumbling. You're just in time, Emma exclaimed. We finished the star for the tree, and everything. Sophia laughed, the sound bright in the crisp winter air. Perfect timing, then. She looked up at James, her smile deepening with a warmth reserved just for him. Hello, stranger. 3 days is hardly stranger territory, he replied with a smile of his own, taking the packages to free her hands. The brief business trip to Chicago had been necessary, but noticeably felt by all of them, a reminder of the delicate balance they continued to maintain. Inside the workshop, warmth greeted them from the efficient wood stove that supplemented the Mitchell Tech heating system. The space reflected its dual purpose, practical tools and equipment on one side, technical workstations and prototype displays on the other. Christmas decorations softened the utilitarian setting, including a small tree waiting for its final ornament. The Mitchell Tech board sends their compliments, Sophia said, setting her briefcase on a workbench and removing her coat. Pine Creek Valley's success metrics exceeded every projection. The initiative is expanding to 12 new communities next year. Any pushback from Victor? James asked, hanging her coat beside his. Surprisingly, no. She smiled at the memory of the board meeting. He actually presented some of the financial data himself. Turns out proving skeptics wrong can convert them to your most vocal supporters. Their easy conversation reflected the rhythm they had developed over the past year, a comfortable exchange of personal and professional, each taking genuine interest in the other's world. What had begun as two separate lives had gradually intertwined into something neither had anticipated, but both now cherished. "Can we do the star now?" Emma asked, holding up the carefully crafted tree topper they had been working on, a blend of traditional design and Mitchell Tech solar cells that would power the tree's lights independently. "Absolutely," Sophia replied, kneeling to examine the creation. "Your engineering is getting better than mine." Emma beamed at the praise. "I added the backup battery just like you showed me." The three gathered around the small tree, James lifting Emma so she could place the star at its peak. When she connected the final wire, the entire tree illuminated with a warm glow that reflected in their faces. "Make a wish, Miss Sophia," Emma said solemnly. "It's Christmas Eve." Sophia glanced at James, then back to Emma. "I think I've used up my wishes for the year. They all came true already." Later after dinner at the small house Sophia had purchased, now expanded to accommodate her growing connection to Pine Creek Valley, they sat before a crackling fire while snow continued to fall outside. Emma had finally succumbed to sleep after extracting promises that no presents would be opened until she awoke. "I have something for you," Sophia said quietly, retrieving an envelope from her briefcase. "Not really a Christmas gift, more of a proposition." James raised an eyebrow as he accepted the envelope. Inside was not the legal document he half expected, but a set of architectural drawings. Plans for a combined home and research facility on a piece of land halfway between Sophia's current house and his cabin. "What am I looking at?" he asked, though he suspected the answer. "The next phase," she replied simply. "If you're interested." He studied the plans more carefully, a thoughtfully designed space that would accommodate both their professional needs and personal lives. A home that belonged neither exclusively to the corporate world nor the rural one, but created something new from elements of both. "This is a big step," he observed, his tone neutral, though his heart was anything but. "One of many we've already taken," she reminded him. "But yes, definitely significant." She moved closer, her shoulder touching his as she pointed out features of the design. "There's a workshop here that's twice the size of your current one. Emma would have her own wing with a study space designed specifically for her learning style. And this," she indicated a central great room with windows facing the mountains, "would be ours. A place that's neither Mitchell Tech nor just Montana, but something we create together." The care she had put into the concept touched him deeply. This wasn't a corporate acquisition or a romantic fantasy, but a practical vision of how their lives could further intertwine while respecting what made each of them who they were. "What about Seattle?" he asked, knowing her corporate responsibilities remained significant despite her increasingly flexible arrangements. "I'll always have obligations there," she acknowledged. "But the past year has proven I can lead effectively while basing my life here. The company is stronger for it, not weaker." She paused, then added with quiet certainty, "And so am I." James set the plans aside and took her hand, his decision already made, though he gave it the respect of deliberate consideration. "When would construction start?" Her smile bloomed slowly as she recognized his acceptance. "Spring thaw. We'd move in by next Christmas." She squeezed his hand gently. "No rush, no pressure, just a direction to move toward together." "I like directions," he said, drawing her closer, "especially when they lead home." Outside, snow continued to fall on Pine Creek Valley, covering the Mitchell Tech solar arrays that had transformed the community's relationship with winter. Inside, before the fire's warm glow, two people who had found each other through chance and chosen each other through understanding embraced the future they were building, not despite their differences, but because of them. And upstairs, a little girl slept peacefully beside a windowsill lined with exactly 1,000 paper cranes, her wish already granted long before the final one was folded.